business. So we are going to have a very interesting lecture and discussion around the mix of this technology that's changing the landscape of business and of the society. And it's a very special moment for us to receive Professor Damodaran here, that will be properly introduced by another professor here from Insper, from the finance group, which is Professor Eduardo Pozzi. Thank you so much for being here, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Thank you.
By the way, this is Silvio Laban, our Executive Education Director. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I am Eduardo Pozzi. I teach corporate finance for undergraduate, graduate, and executive education courses. When considering how I would introduce Professor Damodaran in the context of a lecture on AI, I thought I'll seek ChatGPT's guidance. So I typed, "Who is Aswath Damodaran?" Here is ChatGPT's response. Aswath Damodaran is a renowned professor of finance at the Stern School of Business at New York University. He is widely recognized for his expertise in corporate finance and valuation. Damodaran is particularly known for his work on equity valuation and has authored several influential books on the subject, including Investment Valuation and The Dark Side of Valuation. He is also known for his popular blog, where he shares insights and analysis on various topics related to finance, investing, and valuation. Additionally, Damodaran has been involved in consulting and teaching in corporate finance and valuation for many years, contributing significantly to the field through his research, writings, and teachings. I'm not sure if there was an AI hallucination regarding Professor Damodaran's short bio. I don't think so. But I do know that I'm deeply honored to introduce Professor Damodaran, who throughout his prolific career has compelled us to think critically about corporate finance, valuation, and risk management. Professor Damodaran, thank you very much for being with us today.
My mic is working, right? I hate podiums. Never been able to sit behind a podium. So I asked for and got the lapel mic. I actually teach in a classroom like this one. I teach in an amphitheater. Pretty much every class I've taught for the last 30 years. I have 350 students in my undergraduate valuation class and 200 in my MBA class. And it's a bigger auditorium, but I'm kind of used to auditoriums. So I still don't like the fact that I'm up here and you're down there. I'll give you a little bit of history as to why I am up here. In 1986, I came to NYU as an assistant professor. My head of my department says, I have a class to teach, and he gives me a class to teach. It's a class called Security Analysis. Heard of this class? It's a legendary class. It was taught by a guy called Ben Graham at Columbia University in the 1950s. And if you've never heard of Ben, you've heard of his most famous student. Anybody want to pipe up who was Ben's famous student from the security? Warren Buffett, right? So they give me the class to teach. I take one look and say, I'm not teaching this class. Most boring class ever. Because by 1986, it was showing its age. It was 4 weeks in stocks with one session on valuation. With one model. You know what the model was? The only model I saw in my MBA program is called the Gordon Growth Model. It's a stable growth dividend discount model. You know what the value of Google is with the Gordon Growth Model? It pays no dividends, Google's worth nothing. Now we can debate how much Google is worth, but it's definitely not worth nothing. Turning people loose on the world with the Gordon Growth Model is like doing surgery with a hammer. It's going to be bloody and it's not going to end well. It was 4 weeks on stocks and 3 weeks on bonds and 2 weeks on futures and options and 5 weeks on institutional detail. Like what? An entire session on listing requirements for the New York Stock Exchange. Teaching was so easy in the days before Wikipedia. You could just come here and list the 12. Remember, these were the days before lecture notes. People took everything down. You'd list and this guy's a genius. He knows all 12 listing requirements. If I tried that today, people would be checking Wikipedia on their phones while I'm doing it, saying, I can see it all here. Why is he saying this? So I went to the head of my department and I said, I don't want to teach this class. Not a great attitude for an assistant professor. He should have fired me on the spot. But he was a good guy. He said, what would you like to teach instead? I said, I'd like to teach a valuation class. And he said, don't do it. There isn't enough stuff in valuation to fill a class. And in 1986, he was absolutely right. There wasn't enough stuff in valuation to fill a class. There was one book on valuation. It was called Security Analysis. You know when Security Analysis was written? Anybody have any idea? What year the first edition of Security Analysis was written by Ben Graham? It's a legendary book, right? Everybody's supposed to read it. It was written in 1934. Why does that matter? You were coming out of the Great Depression. When you come out of the Great Depression, what is your number one priority? Save your principal, right? And if you read Ben Graham's Security Analysis, it comes through. It's about saving principal. It's about safety. It's about making sure you don't lose your principal. Not a bad idea. But if you looked at high growth companies through those lenses, Ben Graham said that company's not worth much. Nvidia, I mean, why would you buy it? Look at the book value. There's not much there. But I really, really wanted to teach this class. And I discovered very early in my academic life that if you want to get anything done at a university, the best way to do it is to do it subversively. Because if you tried to get official permission, you know what would happen, right? A committee would be formed. You guys have experience with committees being formed? They meet and they meet. I think they forget what they're meeting about, but they keep meeting because you're supposed to meet every Friday. And after a while, they have subcommittees and subcommittees. And 40 years later, they'd come back and say, you can teach the class. I'd be too old to teach the class. So I said, I'll teach a security analysis class. I walked in, closed the door. And remember, this was 1986. There were no cameras in the classroom. I could have taught cooking for 15 weeks. And if everybody got an A, nobody would complain. I closed the door and I taught evaluation. It was 1986. You know how long it took them to catch on? In 2008, I get a call from the dean's office. We hear you teaching a valuation class. I said, yes, I've been doing it for 22 years. They said, we don't see it listed on the schedule anywhere. I said, that's easy to explain. I've been hijacking all these other classes you've been giving me and teaching valuation instead. You made me teach a class called Equity Instruments and Markets. I'm not that interested in markets. Definitely not interested in instruments. I'm not even that enamored with equity, which leaves me with nothing there but and, so I replaced with valuation. They said, that's not right. We should call it valuation. I said, yes, I agree. So if you look at the valuation, the course schedule at NYU, valuation shows up for the first time in the fall of 2008. And I've thought about this. Maybe I caused the 2008 crisis, and maybe I should have left it at its old name, but no, I don't think I have that much power. But this semester, I'm getting towards the end of my most recent iteration. I teach a class for the MBAs, and I teach a class at the undergraduate. It's exactly the same class, because I've never understood dumbing down a class for younger people or older people. I mean, it is the same class. I would teach the same class to a bunch of financial analysts who've been valuing companies for 50 years. Valuation is valuation. And this will be my 56th and 57th semester teaching valuation. And I'm going to say something about this class that's going to encapsulate how I think about valuation. Everything I know about valuation, I've learned in the course of teaching this class. I didn't know it walking in, but I've learned in the course of teaching. I'll give you a few examples. About a year into teaching this class, in fact, my third semester, fall of 1987, I've always taught on Mondays and Wednesdays. Don't ask me why. I've been trapped into those 2 days. I finished teaching my class. It was October 19th of 1987. I remember the day very well. I finished teaching my class. I come back to my office. And that time, NYU's business school used to be downtown, right next to the American Stock Exchange. We were the building right next to it. I look out of my window, and I see that everybody from the exchange is out on the street. What happened? Fire alarm got pulled? Does anybody remember what happened on October 19th of 1980? On that day, the S&P 500 dropped by 22% in one day. 22%, that's a bear market in one day. Never had happened before. There are lots of Black Mondays. Something about Monday just attracts black, I think. Right? There's another Black Monday, a really black. But Wednesday, I go in for my valuation class, and guess what the first question I get asked? How, with valuation tools, can you explain the entire market dropping by 22%? This isn't one company, it's the entire market. I would be lying if I said I didn't know the answer, but I've learned to bullshit my way through pretty much every question you get asked. But I said, I don't know, but let's figure it out. And on that day, I started thinking about what is it that causes market crises? And I didn't get the answer immediately, but over the course of this class, we've had a dozen market crises, and I've learned more about how to explain with valuation tools why markets go into crisis. Move forward a few years, we're in the 1990s. And for the first time in public markets, you see a phenomenon you hadn't seen before. Young companies with unformed business models going public. Did young companies go public before the 1990s? Absolutely. But they already had business models. If you get a chance, go online and see if you can pull up the prospectus that Apple filed in 1980 when they went public. Young company, but it was already making money. In 1980, for instance, if you look at all IPOs, companies that went public, 85% of companies that went public in 1980 were money-making companies. So they might have been small, but their business model was already. In the 1990s, for the first time, until the 1990s, these companies had existed, but they stayed private, and who funded them? Venture capitalists. But these companies jumped the queue and went directly to public market. You know what I'm talking about, right? What were these young companies without business models that were in public in the 1990s? That was the dot-com boom. Companies effectively saying. And I remember the day in 1997, a student in my class puts up her hand and she says, have you seen this company called Amazon.com? I said, yeah, I've got on their website, I bought a few books. There used to be an online book retailer there. He said, can we value Amazon.com in class today? And stupidly, I said yes. Because the truth is, there was nothing in the books or in the literature on how to value young companies. Every model started with earnings growing and cash flows catching up. And here you had a company with no business model. And over the course of that semester, we valued Amazon.com. And every input was like pulling teeth. Everything was work. And I kept a journal of my torture. And by the time I was done, that journal was 74 pages long. I never waste anything I write. I don't do research, I dabble. And whenever I dabble, I write something. So I slapped a title on that journal. The dark side of valuation, can Amazon.com be valued? Somebody just before the class said they'd read that original article, which eventually became a book. But it's about valuing young companies. But I learned about valuing young companies in the process of valuing Amazon. So when you see me value Reddit, company that went just public, you're going to see the lessons I learned from valuing Amazon play out when I value young companies. And then you move forward another decade. You're in 2008, and the market is in crisis. A crisis created by banks behaving badly. And the big question is, why when banks behave badly do the rest of us feel the pain? We can give it a word, systemic risk, something that spreads, but ultimately what does that even mean? And in the context of that bank crisis, we had to talk about why if JP Morgan is in trouble, does Microsoft feel the heat? And then you get to the last decade, and you get the decade of the numbers company. And the numbers were not in the financial statement. Let me explain. What's Facebook's most impressive number? Number you've never seen before. Not its revenues. Lots of companies have more revenues than Facebook. Not its margins. They're good, but Philip Morris has better margins. It is, what is it? Number of users. There are 3 billion people in the Facebook ecosystem. Remember, Facebook is Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. That ecosystem, there are 3. If you think about adults on the face of the earth, 1 in every 2 people is on the Facebook ecosystem. The most impressive number about Netflix is not the number of bad shows that they have. That is pretty impressive, right? I mean, Netflix, you can spend all night looking for a show to watch, right? It's the fact that for the first time, you had a model that had 250 million subscribers. No entertainment company had something like that. And the reason I call them the numbers companies, that became their big boast, right? When they went public, look at how many users we have, how many subscribers. Forget about the revenues, the earnings. They didn't want to even look at that. And I said, okay, I'll play along. And in 2017, again, somebody in my class, and you can see how this gets triggered by a question along the way, as, can you value a Netflix subscriber? Notice the question, it's not can you value Netflix, the company. Can you value Netflix subscriber? Somebody help me out. To value Netflix subscriber, using the traditional tools of valuation, what are some of the things I need to know? You want to try? To value Netflix subscriber? Yeah. How does Netflix make, are you a Netflix subscriber? Let's pick somebody who is a Netflix subscriber. Every month, do they charge you something? I would hope they do, right? So if you're a subscriber, you know how much value you are to Netflix. I'm going to look at the subscription revenues I collect from you. For how long? In other words, I need to know how long a subscriber stays on. That's called churn rates. Basically, I need to know what percentages. So you can see how I'm going to build up to this. I'm going to look at a typical subscriber and look at what they charge. I don't know what they charge in Brazil, but I get charged because I pay the family subscription because everybody seems to live off my Netflix. I have 4 kids. $23.99 a month. I don't think it's that high in Brazil. What do you pay a month? It can't be an approximate number. It is an exact number. Yeah. See, that's the other thing about subscription models. After a while, you stop checking what they charge you. Have you noticed that? It comes through as a text. Netflix charges you. You don't even notice they're charging you 3 times more. It's a very sticky model. So to value a Netflix subscriber, here's what you need to do. You need to estimate how long a subscriber stays on, what do you collect in subscription revenues, and whatever it costs Netflix to service the additional subscriber, which is not much. I don't get much personalized attention from Netflix. You say, what about content? They don't make content just for you. This is the difference between Netflix and Spotify. Netflix makes content, then signs up subscribers. You know how Spotify pays for content? Let's say you like to listen to a Beyonce song on Spotify. Every time you stream that song, Beyonce gets paid. It's paid per stream, which makes content costs a variable cost for Spotify. So as the number of subscribers goes up, the content cost, which means economies of scale are not going to kick in with Spotify the way they are going to do with Netflix. So that semester, we valued a Netflix subscriber, and I created a framework. And then I applied it to valuing an Uber rider. Much messier. Do you see why? What's the difference between valuing a Netflix subscriber and an Uber rider that makes an Uber rider more difficult to value? It's not fixed, right? I'll wager, how many of you use Uber in this room? Okay. But then if I looked at how much each of you spends on Uber, it's going to be wildly divergent. It's a transaction-based model. So an average Uber rider might spend $50. But somebody like my youngest son, who seems to think that Uber is the only way to get from point A to point B. Because he's still on my credit card because I want to know that he's still alive on Saturday nights. So he's on Uber, so he's okay, right? There are some nights I look at, there are 6 Uber charges in one night. I think he's actually hiring an Uber driver to carry him from the bed to the bathroom and getting charged for that. I mean, he's going to be a much more... So when you value an Uber rider, you're trying to come up with an average Uber rider, but the framework stays the same. and then you get to 2020, and you have an experiment that the world has never run before. You know, the experiment was, right? Let's shut the global economy down. Let's hope it restarts when we try. We did shut the global economy down for a couple of months. Nobody, in hindsight, you're saying, I always knew everything was going to be okay. Nobody did. In April of 2020, there was a very real chance when you tried to restart the engine that wouldn't start back up. I was teaching the class during that semester. It was the middle of the semester, March 6th, we get an email from NYU saying, you guys need to go home. There's a pandemic, but you'll be back in 4 weeks. I went back home to San Diego, much better weather, and I taught for a couple of weeks on Zoom, and then very quickly we realized that this was going to be a long time. And I remember it was March 23rd at the class, and somebody says, can you value Boeing in a world where nobody's flying and you could go bankrupt? And I said, let's try. It's actually on YouTube, that valuation I did on March 23rd of 2020. How do you value a company that produces aircraft when airlines are not flying, and debt can put you down overnight? I didn't want to. But valuation, you have to live in the times you're in. That I've never used a case study in 40 years of teaching. You know why? Because I have 40,000 live case studies in front of me. Every company is a live case study. Why would I go back to some Harvard Business School case from 1988 where I know what the outcome is and put it in? The way I think about valuation is a craft. It's like cooking is a craft. How do you master cooking? You could read cookbooks, you could watch cooking shows, but until you go into the kitchen, you really haven't cooked, right? In theory, I can make a souffle. In practice, I won't even try. Yeah? Is the theory they whip the egg to the white stand up. I've never been able to do it. I've whipped it many ways. It just stays like a regular egg. But you learn cooking by cooking. You learn valuation by doing. We read too much. I'll say that again. We read too much. We think too little. And it's become so easy to look up the answer. I call this the Google search curse. When you want to know the answer to something, what do? What tax rate should I use in valuation? Oh, there's the answer. We've lost the capacity to reason our way to answers because it's the same effect that GPS has. Right? I can't read a map anymore. I have no idea. North, south, turn the whole thing around. Because I'm so used to GPS saying turn right, turn left. If my GPS goes down, I can't even get home from 3 blocks away. We think too little. So my advice is, if you truly want to master valuation, don't watch other people talk about valuation, including me. So the next hour and a half is kind of wasted. Don't read about valuation, even though there's lots of stuff out there. Spend some time thinking about things that puzzle. Now, get that muscle going. It is a muscle like any other. The more you use it, the better your reasoning will become. And the more you will develop your own way of thinking, because that's basically what you want to hold on to, a framework that's yours, where you can take the things that you don't understand. So every time something new comes along, I go back to the framework. So what I want to talk about today is something that is clearly in the public consciousness. AI, right? Let's step back. 2 years ago, if I were doing this, my guess is most of the people in this room would not have heard of AI. Something seems to have triggered this. So what is it that triggered AI into the public consciousness? It was ChatGPT. The lowest tech AI you can think of. And the reason it triggered consciousness is you could see it happening. My wife teaches 5th grade. And she came back and talked about kids using ChatGPT for assignments she was giving. It's amazing that, because AI is actually a culmination of 2 trends that have been going on for 15 years. One is the collection of large amounts of data, which we have voluntarily agreed to, right? I told you I use GPS in return. What do I give up? your GPS won't work if your location is not turned on. Google Maps won't work if it doesn't know your location. So in return for giving me free mapping, Google knows at every point in time where I am. That battle's lost. If you think you have any, that people don't know much about, they know everything about you because you wanted the convenience and you gave up privacy in return. So one thing that's happened is we have immense amounts of data, not just financial data, but data about what people are doing. That's one development. And we have powerful servers, right? That's a cloud business that got developed so you can store all this data. The other is our computers are getting insanely powerful while getting more compact. I am old enough to remember that in 1981, when I took my summer job, I was given what was called a K-Pro, one of the very first computers you could use. It's a very primitive computer in hindsight. It came with 128K of storage, 128K. Check out the storage you have on your smartphone. That'll tell you what kind of storage I have. So we have more data and more power. What's AI? Basically, AI is just taking the data, using processing power to kind of replicate what a human being could do with that supreme knowledge. A couple of weeks ago, I got a call from a friend of mine who teaches at NYU. He teaches, machine learning, and his area is technology. And he said, and he'd asked me this a year and a half ago, so I knew it was coming. He said, I built a Damodaran bot. I said, what? He said, I've essentially created an AI which has read every single one of your blog posts and books, looked at every one of your valuations, and we've trained it to value a company. And he said, can you give us 20 students from your class because we want to test out how the Damodaran bot does relative to your students. I'm terrified of either outcome. If it works really well, what does that tell me? I've just made myself redundant. If it works really badly, that tells me I'm not teaching very well because the blogs are not... I don't know what I'd like to see, but the experiment is on. It's out of my hands. This is nothing that we can control. It's going to happen. The question is what the outcome is going to be for us. And right now, it's all buzz. So one of the things I'd like to talk about is how AI will change markets. What are the title actually kind of gives away. I'll make a prediction. 10 years from now, when we look back at AI, there will be some winners. Do we know who they'll be? Right now, if you were to name names, who are the companies that are being offered as the potential winners? Let's start with the obvious. Nvidia, obviously. Who else? Microsoft. Adobe is kind of risen because of AI. But it's a small subset of companies, but I'll make a prediction. 10 years from when we look back, there will be companies on that list that we'd never heard of before. And some companies on that list that we thought would make the list but kind of dropped off. That's a history of disruptive change. Second, will markets be higher because of AI? Net, it's neutral. You're saying, but Nvidia is winning. Nvidia is winning because it's making the chips. The way I think about Nvidia is the way I thought about Cisco for the dot-com boom. What did Cisco do? It provided the infrastructure for the internet. So it boomed with the dot-com boom. Nvidia is the architecture. Microsoft, if you think about it, still hasn't made any money off AI, at least in tangible ways. But the reason it's thought of as a winner is because of what? What did Microsoft do that's kind of put them ahead of the pack? They entered into a partnership with OpenAI, which is corporate governance nightmare because it's I have no idea how you even think of it. It's a non-profit that's worth $90 billion. You see, that's an oxymoron. If you're a non-profit, you should be worth nothing. So the fact that you're worth $90 billion means one of those two things is a lie. And I will let you decide which one's a lie. But that partnership happened to be very convenient because it put Microsoft at the cutting edge, at least in perception. But right now, if you ask me to show companies that actually tangibly are making money on AI, they're relatively few. Right? But everybody's talking about it. Last year, Kroger. You know what Kroger does? It's a grocery store chain. Okay? In their earnings report, talked about AI 13 times in one earnings report. My reaction was, what? How is AI going to change my grocery shopping? I still have to go to the grocery store. I still have to pick stuff. What are you telling me AI is going to do? But you see this happening. People throwing AI saying, that's going to help me. I'll make a prediction. For most companies, AI is going to be a net loser. You're saying, but it'll lower my costs. You know, any story where AI reduces costs, not just for you, but everybody in your sector, means you're not going to make money on AI. What's going to happen if every company has lower costs because of AI? Your consulting firms, you've reduced your costs by 50% because you fired half your consultants. It's true, you all have lower costs. But if you all have lower costs, what's going to happen? You're going to charge lower prices. The competition is going to drive it down. That's what happened with every one of the disruptive changes. The companies that used it to reduce costs did not get any benefits from it. So there'll be winners. There'll be companies that kind of treading water, and there'll be a lot of wannabes. Wannabes are the companies that told you they were going to make amazing things with AI, and they're going to crash and burn, just as we've seen in previous disruptions. So what I'd like to start with is a very simple intrinsic value course. How many of you have taken a valuation class? All right. Okay. So I'm going to summarize what an intrinsic value is. If you haven't taken a valuation class, don't worry. Intrinsic valuation, you value an asset or a business based on its cash flows, its growth, and risk. So for any cash flow generating asset, you can argue there is an intrinsic value, and you're going to try to estimate. Now, of course, the form this usually takes is a discounted cash flow valuation, or a DCF. I have mixed feelings about the way DCF has become a creature on its own. It's just a vehicle for showing the cash flows, the growth, and risk of the business. That's the way I think about a discounted cash flow value. In an intrinsic valuation, you're attaching a value to something based on its capacity to generate cash flows. Is this something recent? No, this is as old as time. That Venetian glassmaker who sold his business in the Middle Ages, the person buying the business bought it based on cash flows, growth, and risk. The fact that we've come up with risk and return models in the last 50 or 100 years, it's really not even an innovation. That's just a way of thinking through how to bring risk into the value. So if you ask me to summarize intrinsic valuation of a page, in intrinsic valuation, you take the value of an asset is the present value of the expected cash flows on that asset, discounted back at a risk-adjusted discount. Now, as you know, I value companies on my blog. I value them for myself. I tell people, look, the only person I have to keep happy is me. And I like what I do. It's not my job to tell you what to buy or tell you what to sell. What business is it of mine? It's your money. If you want to buy Bitcoin, go buy Bitcoin. Don't ask me to affirm what you're doing or disagree with what you're doing. It's your money. Okay? So I value companies for myself. And I consistently go back to a company where I know I'm going to get punishment. I value Tesla every 2 years. Every time. Every year I value Tesla. And every time I value Tesla, I hear from a lot of people who disagree with it. On both directions. Tesla is one of those companies where you either think it's worth nothing. The whole thing is a scam because you don't like Elon Musk, the whole thing is a scam. Or you think it's worth trillions. Greatest company in the face of it. So no matter what I do, people say, and one of the critiques I will hear is, you're a valuation theorist. And I have to laugh. You know how little theory there is? That's my theory. That's my entire class. That's the theory. 26 sessions of filling in that equation, right? If you think about what I do is I talk about better ways of estimating the expected cash flow and better ways of adjusting my discount rate for risk. There's no theory in valuation. It's all pragmatic. But that equation is what animates all of intrinsic. There's another version of intrinsic valuation which you might see sometimes. I've never seen it done right. Where instead of using the expected cash flows, use what are called certainty equivalent cash flows. You're saying, what are those? You ever seen the show Let's Make a Deal? Is there a version of that in Brazil? In the show, Howie Mandel in the US plays the show. And basically, here's what the show is. There are suitcases up on the stage. So there's one suitcase which has $1 million in it. and one suitcase with nothing. And you're a contestant. So Howie will call you up and say, you're the contestant, there are two suitcases there, one is $1 million, one is nothing. How much would you pay, would I have to pay you for you to walk away from that bet? Anybody want to be my guinea pig? $1 million, $0. How much would I have to pay you for you to walk away from that bet? Do we guaranteed money in your pocket, right? What would you demand? 500,000. You would really demand, so 480 you won't take? What's the difference though? If I pay you the money is in your hand, it's guaranteed, right? If you don't take the money, what do you get? A gamble where you could get 0 or $1 million. We are risk averse as human beings. In fact, in the 1600s, there's this experiment that this Italian called Bernoulli ran, where he basically ran this bet through and he discovered that people don't pay the expected value. They pay less because they want certainty. We're not risk neutral, we're risk averse. And the more risk averse you are, the less you will take to go away. So I watched the show for a long time. I spend most of my time watching Netflix bad shows and game shows. And people will say 380, 400, 420. Nobody's ever said 500 because you're not risk neutral. Certainty equivalence, that's what you're doing. You're replacing an expected cash flow with a certainty equivalent. So imagine valuing Vale, right? I can project out the expected cash flows, but is there a lot of uncertainty about those cash flows? Yeah, every time the iron ore price moves, my cash flows are going to move. If I offered you a guaranteed cash flow each year, would you take it? Yes, and it'll be far lower than the expected cash flow. And if I do that, if I'm able to do that, you can see why it's going to be a mess by the time I get to year 7 or 8. I can discount those cash flows at a risk-free rate. Why? Because your cash flows are already risk-adjusted. I've never seen anybody do a certain equivalent valuation, but you're trying to do the same thing, a risk-adjusted value for a business. So I'm going to use that very simple equation to state 4 propositions in intrinsic value that kind of cut to the chase. My favorite one is the very first proposition, called the IT proposition. If it does not affect the cash flows and it does not affect risk, it cannot affect value. Let me repeat that again. If it does not affect the cash flows, you're saying, what's it? You name it. So throw me some buzzwords. And business school is really about learning enough buzzwords so you can talk as if you know things even when you don't, right? So throw me some buzzwords that you... If you're in a marketing class, it's a big deal that people... Sustainability. I'm glad you put that up. What does that even mean? No, I'm curious. I asked this of a Harvard business... I asked this of Robert Eccles, who's, kind of the father. What does it mean? Anybody want to help me out here? What does it mean? I want to make my business more sustainable. Actually, I got 50 CSOs. You know what CSOs are? It's amazing how many people at the top who keep multiplying in terms of, there used to be CEO and CFO. A CFO is a Chief Sustainability Officer. So these were 50 CSOs, many of the largest companies in the US. They asked me whether I could talk to them. And I said, are you sure you want me to talk to them? I don't even know what sustainability means. They said, I would like to talk to them. So I opened the session by asking, can any of you explain to me what the S in your title is? What exactly is sustainable? Anybody want to step in and give me, this is a big buzzword in business. What does it mean? So basically, you don't know what it means, but I'll wager you're taking an entire class on, I'm sure you have sustainable businesses. Yeah. Dangerous place we're in, right, when we can't define it. So I'll fill in the possibilities. Maybe sustainable means that your business will last longer. Is that what? So you want to make your business. Do you want tobacco companies to last longer or fossil fuel companies? I'm not sure you want a company to last longer. By itself, it's not necessarily a good thing, right? You're in a declining business. There is that element in sustainability that a business that lasts longer is better than a business that doesn't last as long. They remind me of the Egyptian pharaohs. You know what? They wanted to live forever. So what did they do when they died? They got people to wrap them in bandages and stick them in crypts with all their favorite things around them. And guess what? They were still dead. 2,000 years later, British explorer broke and stole all their favorite things and put the mummy up for display, right? The King Tut exhibit traveling around the world. There's a lot of sustainability. You say, what the heck do you even mean? So you picked a word where I can't even tell you what the effect on cash flows are because you can't tell me what sustainability is. That's a first test. Many of you know that I don't like ESG. In fact, don't like is too weak a word. I despise ESG. I think it's the most toxic, empty concept ever concocted in business. And the sooner you can bury it, the better. What is ESG? Come on. Some of you must be true believers, right? Nobody wants to admit to it anymore? What is ESG? I know it's E, the S, and the G. Yeah. Materiality. Now we're talking accounting terms, right? Materiality in accounting is, will it move my earnings? So if it doesn't move your earnings, we shouldn't care about it then? Does it? I mean, in a sense, you almost... So tell me what part of ESG affects cash flow. So you're saying if I create pollution, it'll... So why do I need ESG? That's already in my cash flows. The very nature of ESG is you're talking about environment things that don't have materiality, right? Because if it has materiality, I don't need you to remind me to be careful. But you want to remind me about things that could have materiality 10 years from now. You say, you got to take care of it now. Okay. What about the S part? What the heck is that? What's the cash flow effect of that? And the G part doesn't even belong. You think, but governance matters. The G in ESG has nothing to do with corporate governance, which is something we've cared about in business all the time. In corporate governance, it's about managers being accountable to shareholders. That's what corporate governance is. The G in ESG is stakeholder governance. What does that mean? You're accountable to everybody, which means you're accountable to nobody. You see why? You're the shareholders. Your stock price is down 20%. You say, what did you do? I said, well, I had to take care of labor this year. The employees, their wages are, why? Because society was calling me. It becomes an easy way to pass them. No wonder CEOs love ESG. You're accountable to no one. My first piece on ESG was in 2019, when it was peak glory. Nobody was contesting it. And I remember I started the post by saying, as you read this, you're going to think I'm a moral troglodyte. Because you're not supposed to challenge. This is good for the world. How dare you say? And I said, look, I'm curious because I've been told by Larry Fink that ESG is good for value. Tell me where. And I went through the revenue growth, the margin, looked at every piece of evidence out there, and I couldn't find a single piece of evidence that ESG moves the cash flows or gives you a lower cost of capital. You can tell me whatever story you want, but it's not in the data. The IT proposition is a great way to separate bullshit from things that matter. And there's a lot of bullshit out there. People selling buzzwords saying, this is amazing, this is new. And with AI, that is the test I'm going to run. So when Kroger says AI will increase my value, I'm going to say, where? Are you going to sell more because of AI? Are you going to have higher margins? Are you going to have less risk? It's a great way to separate the wannabes from the companies that really matter. With Nvidia, does AI affect cash flows? What does Nvidia do that gives it higher cash flows? It sells more chips. It is the architecture. So I can show you the revenues that came from AI chips. Those AI chips are immensely profitable. They have 50% margins. Do you know that Nvidia doesn't make a single chip? It designs chips. You know who makes all the chips? TSMC. There's a China risk component you better be building into Nvidia valuation, because if China decides to pull a Russia, God help you, right? But Nvidia, there is a direct consequence. I'm going to value the AI piece in Nvidia and say, this is how much value comes from it. It's in the cash flows and the risk. I'm not going to weigh my hands. It's worth a lot, therefore I'll pay any premium you want. With Microsoft, can AI make a difference? Yes, I can see a subscription model that Microsoft creates, maybe as an extension of the LinkedIn model where they already have a subscription model. But if you subscribe to the model, you get an advanced version of ChatGPT, which does more stuff than the basic ChatGPT. I can build a subscription model. Use the it proposition to separate the wannabes from the companies that matter. Second, the don't be a wuss proposition. You value young AI company, or you value any young company. What are you going to see? You're going to see cash flows that are negative. You're going to see a lot of uncertainty. And as human beings, what's our reaction when there's a lot of uncertainty? Oh, we can't value things. It's too much uncertainty, which I've never understood. You buy a stock, whether you like it or not, you expose the uncertainty. You can choose to look uncertainty in the face and try to do your best. Or you can act like it's not there. And most people are using the second choice. They're in denial. It's uncertain, so I'm not going to look. If you don't look, it's still there, right? Might as well make your best estimate. So don't give up on something just because you have trouble making estimates. You know why engineers have a tough time with valuation? Because they're used to precision. How do I know I'm right? I'll save you the trouble. You're definitely wrong. I've never valued a company where it ever got a cash flow exactly right. If it happened, I'd freak out. You know why you're definitely wrong? Because you're not God. You don't control the future. You can do the best you can, and fate will deliver results that are out of your control. So don't let uncertainty be the enemy of making estimates. It's my biggest disagreement with the old value investing. I mean, I've been to Omaha 6 times in the last decade. I never go to the meetings themselves. Omaha is where Berkshire Hathaway is, its meetings. I've never been to the meetings themselves, but I go talk to the portfolio managers who've been coming to Omaha every year for the last. They're true believers. And their view is, you shouldn't value something unless you feel pretty sure about the number. And I'll make a safe prediction. If that's the way you think about valuation, what kinds of companies you're going to be valuing over and over and over again? Mature companies that have established business models, and you're going to buy Coca-Cola and Kraft Heinz over and over and over again, right? It's what 3G Capital and Warren Buffett did in 2015. You're never going to buy an Nvidia, even if it's cheap, because it'll never come onto your radar because it's always going to be uncertain. Unless you're willing to face uncertainty, you're going to be stuck in a smaller and smaller part of the market of mature and declining companies. The only ones you're going to keep valuing over and over again. Third proposition, the DER proposition. You heard of a company called MoviePass? About 10 years ago in the US, the company gets started. And here's what the company offered. For $9.95 a month, if you're a subscriber, you got to watch as many movies as you wanted in movie theaters. And MoviePass would cover the cost of your ticket. You know what the cost of a ticket in New York is for a movie? I've been once, and then I said, I'm not going in. $22, right? If I got a MoviePass in New York, this is like for half the cost of one movie. I can see 15 movies. So even when it came out, I said, how does a business like this even make sense? And there are a lot of businesses here. How do you ever make money with this business? And then I watched the CEO of this company on CNBC, and I understood how stupid people can be and still start business. Here's what he said. He said, we charge $9.95 per subscriber. The average American goes to one movie a month. Hang in there with this story. And the average movie ticket in the US costs $7.50. We're going to make a lot of money. How stupid can you be to rise to the top of an organization and make this statement? What's the flaw here? It's not the average guy who's buying your subscription, right? It's people like my oldest son who loves the movies, who goes to 20 movies a month. He's paying $9.95 and going to 20 movies. I can safely predict what your cash flows are going to look like for the rest of eternity. You got a broken business model. Your cash flows are going to be negative, not just next year, not just 2 years. And the more you grow, the more negative they will get. There's no economies of scale that are going to kick in. So the DER proposition is reserved for companies like MoviePass, companies with broken business models. But scaling up is not the solution. You know how many publicly traded young companies have broken business models? I look at them and say, there's no light at the end of the tunnel here. Don't ask me to pay for a company where there's no light at the end of the tunnel. 4 years ago, no, 5 years ago, a company called WeWork tried to go public. Remember that fiasco? What's WeWork's business model? Somebody tell me what, in a nutshell, how does WeWork work? I'm sure there's a WeWork building in Sao Paulo. What do you do? Sharing space, but how do they get the space that they share out? They sign a long-term lease on a building, a 40-year lease, in prime office space, right? Usually in the most expensive part of the city. Then they spruce it up. Kombucha coming out of the walls, I mean, all kinds of neat stuff that young people like, I guess. It's only a matter of time before cannabis is, you have a Cannabis Corner, you can go and breathe in a few breaths and then come back to work. But it's a 40-year lease, and then they sublease it, right? That's a big selling point. You can come rent. It's a business model that is a fiasco. You know why it's never worked in real estate? What happens if you lease something long-term and sublease it short-term? All you need is one recession, and you're going to go bankrupt. Why? Because all those sublessors will leave. You still have to pay the lease payments. I remember looking and said, this is stupid. But with the time it went public, Goldman Sachs told me it was worth $96 billion. Why? The business model is so dumb that you can't figure a way out. Why did Goldman Sachs think it was worth so much? Who is the biggest investor in WeWork as it was a private company? A company called SoftBank. And who is the person that you think of when you think of SoftBank? A man called Masa Son. And in 2019, he was this godlike figure. And in fact, he had godlike delusions as well because he made 300-year plans. Who makes 300-year plans? But he did. He was viewed as a visionary. And WeWork had provided 7 of the 10 rounds of venture capital the SoftBank had provided 7 of the 10 rounds to bring them up to $47 billion. You know how Goldman Sachs' mind worked, right? Masa Son is a brilliant guy. If he thinks WeWork is worth $47 billion, it must be really worth twice that amount. That's investment banking pricing in a nutshell. If you think investment banks actually can value something, let go of the delusion. They're pricers, and they price based on what they think are the smart pricers. In this case, you got the smartest pricer out there, Masa Son. So I approached that IPO with open eyes. I said, maybe they figured out a way to fix this duration mismatch, that fundamental problem. 350-page prospectus, there's not one mention of the duration. Either they don't realize there's a duration mismatch, which is already a huge problem, or they realize there's a duration mismatch and they hope you don't notice. Either way, you have a problem. So at that time, I said, even my best case, I can't see this business taking off. So this semester, people are valuing WeWork. And WeWork, that IPO collapsed. SoftBank actually provided fresh capital and claimed that WeWork's value was actually $8 billion. You know why they had to do that, right? Because otherwise they'd have to write it down to zero on their balance sheet. 4 years later, God help us, it goes back public again. You're saying, what's wrong with you guys? And then a year later, it's in Chapter 11 in bankruptcy. But this is like one of those, have you seen the Walking Dead shows? Where the dead people my son watched it one summer and the screams wouldn't leave my head for like months afterwards. The whole show, there's really no conversation. It's people screaming, squealing, yelling, dying, and coming back to life. WeWork reminds me of one of those Walking Dead characters. He said, please put a stake through the head and kill this damn business because it's not worth saving. So the DER proposition is if you have negative cash flows for the long term, just let it go. But you can have businesses with negative cash flows where there is light at the end of the tunnel. Young company, money losing. So tell me some of the ways in which young money losing companies find light. What are some of the things that convert the losses to profits? One is economies of scale, right? Every company claims this. How would you check to see whether there are economies of scale? Yeah, but that's tough to chronicle, right? Because accounting, you know what, if you have economies of scale, and I look at your history, what should I see? That your revenues are growing at a faster rate than cost, right? For 10 years, I heard Uber talk about economies of scale. But you looked at the revenues, they grew at 22%, the costs were growing at 25%. So every company uses the word, but you can have true economies of scale if your costs are growing at a lower rate. You can see why Netflix has a higher potential for economies of scale, but if Spotify talks about economies of scale, I'm going to push back. Because as they scale up, the costs will also go up. What else causes, in addition to economies of scale? You heard of the word unit economics? Now, unit economics, and it's an extension. Unit economics basically is, what do you make on that next unit you sell? Let's take two companies. Let's take Microsoft. Let's say you get on their website, you buy a copy. I guess you can't even buy a copy of Office anymore. You've got to become a 365 subscriber. You become a 365 subscriber. Did they pay $69.99 a year? So you pay $69.99. How much does it cost Microsoft to create that extra copy of Office for you? If you're operating the delusion that there's some kind of a elf at Microsoft running around saying, let me make a copy, this person just became a subscriber, they spend nothing. It is pure profit. That's a great unit economics model. How does it show up? You look at the operating margins for software companies. And they're healthy. They're 45, 50, 55% because almost everything flows. We're going to talk about the unit economics of Nvidia. It's a design company. It doesn't make the chips. So when it sells something, it just flows through. So its operating margins reflect it. In contrast, if you're Tesla, and I remember the peak days, the glory days of Tesla, when people talked about, you've heard of Kathy Wood? She makes up a lot of crap, right? She tells a good story, but can't value a $20 bill in a brown paper bag if you put it in front of her. So ARK, the fund that she runs, actually did a Tesla valuation. And they built a big story, and they gave Tesla 60% operating margin. And I said, do you have any idea how a business works? There is zero chance that Tesla can ever have 60% margins. And why is that? When Tesla sells another car, what does it have to do? It has to make the car. Unless they figure out a way to send you a virtual Tesla. I mean, I can't put it past Elon Musk. You act like you have a Tesla, you get in, you put on these glasses and look like you're driving somewhere. But they have to make the damn car. No automobile company can ever have 60% margins. No automobile company in history has ever had 20% margin. Ferrari, I think, comes closest. Unit economics. So am I willing to open the door? I do it all the time with young companies. I cut them some slack. I make the best case scenarios, and if the company is good, you know what? At the right price, I will buy the company. That's basically the don't freak out. Don't give up on a company just because the cash flows and earnings are negative right now, because these companies can still be worth a lot. Now, over the last 40 years, it's become so easy to build complex models. I did my first valuation with a ledger sheet, a paper, and a calculator. Most of you don't even know what a ledger sheet looks like. It's just a blank sheet of paper with lines drawn through it, so you don't have to draw the lines yourself. Great innovation at the time. But when you value a company with a ledger sheet, a pencil, and a calculator, how many line items are there going to be in your value? Remember, every cell, you got to compute and enter into the cell. So almost by design, you're not going to have 500 line items. You're going to stop at 1250. Today you have an Excel spreadsheet. Have you ever seen banking valuations? They're horrendous. Restatement forecast. What the heck are you doing forecasting all 3 financial statements? My youngest son, about 3 years ago, when he was at Yale, got an internship at D.E. Shaw, the hedge fund. So during the summer, he calls me. He says, Dad, I've been asked to value a company, and I've been asked to do a 3-statement forecast. You know what a 3-statement forecast? You forecast the income statement, the balance sheet, the statement of cash flows, and he said, I've never done it. Can you help me? And I said, I would if I've ever done it. I said, no. I said, I've never, in 40 years of valuation, I've never once felt the need to forecast out all 3 financials. He said, but don't you need some items on the statements? I said, I need about 6. Why am I forecasting the other 394? It's a huge waste of time, but you know why people do it? It's costless now. It's built into the spreadsheet. In fact, all you do is enter your base year numbers, and it magically fills out the next 20 years for you. I mean, you're setting yourself to be outsourced right there, right? Because what the heck are you doing other than hitting that button on the Excel saying, let it go? ChatGPT can go do it for you. We've built these incredibly complex. My rule in valuation is be parsimonious. Less is more. I pretty much use the same spreadsheet to value young companies, old companies. You see it on my website. You can download it. It's called the FCFF Simple Ginzu spreadsheet. And it reflects the fact, that everything is built in there. All you need to do is give me the 8, 10 numbers, and I build your valuation of the following drivers. Your revenue growth that captures the growth part of your business. Operating margins that reflect unit economics, economics of scale. How efficiently you deliver growth. You grow revenues, you got to do something. Are you building factories? Are you doing R&D? Are you acquiring other companies? Tell me, because that goes in. Those give me my cash flows. That's all I need. Growth, margins, reinvestment. And in the denominator, of course, I capture the risk in a discount rate, and I also allow for the fact that you might not make it. One of my biggest peeves with discounted cash flow valuation is how every company becomes a gigantic monstrosity by the time you get to year 10. You put a 2% growth forever, and it goes on and on and on. In the real world, companies do fail, and you got to factor that into your value. You give me a company, my objective is to find a way to get those 5 inputs. And if you've read my pieces on narrative and numbers, I talk about how your story about the company drives those 5 numbers. So that long lead, and let's talk about revolutionary change. One of the few benefits of getting older. This semester I have at least a dozen students in my class whose parents were also in my class. One claimed, and I hope this is not true, that a grandparent was in my class. I said, I'm not that old. Or either that, or you're in a family where people keep having kids when they're 17. Now, I don't know what it is. But one of the few benefits of being old is you gain some perspective. You've seen the show before. So one of the things that you get, I'll say the same thing about revolutionary change that I would say about recession. You know the old saying about recessions, right? Markets have predicted 10 of the last 3 recessions. Let me repeat that again. 10 of the. In other words, markets predict recessions even when they're not. Same thing's true about revolutionary change. You see every year, every 3 or 4 years, some word come in. In the last decade, you had cloud for a while. That was a big buzzword. And I said, I'm not that excited. There are businesses that can make money in the cloud. It's not personal. I don't feel it. Then the metaverse. And this really puzzled me. Remember when Facebook said we're going to invest? I said, what exactly? I'm still struggling with the metaverse, right? Now, to me, it's SimCity on steroids, right? That's basically what the metaverse is. If you've never seen SimCity, it's the original virtual show. You could buy a virtual house, a virtual car, get a virtual spouse, get virtual kids, send them to virtual school. And I guess there is some advantage to living in a virtual world because you can have a big house and multiple spouses and great, brilliant kids because you can create them all from scratch. But it's not, again, something I can relate to. So when AI came along, I said, is this a revolutionary change? Is it change? And I'll give you the things I look for. First is, will it have staying power? Notice that nobody talks about the metaverse. It's kind of gone out. Most of these words come in and they're gone. Okay? Second, does it reach across businesses? My problem with the cloud story was, I could see some companies, but for most of us, the cloud is just some space, place where you save. Instead of saving, having a backup of your own, you backed up on the cloud. But beyond that, he said, who cares? And third, does it affect not just businesses, but the way we live? And in my lifetime, there are at least 4 big revolutionary changes I've already lived through. I told you I started in this business when nobody had personal computers, 1981. by the time you got to the end of the 80s, personal computers had made their way not just into your business life, but into your personal. They changed the way we work and live. People forget what the world looked like before personal computers, but they changed the world, they changed the way we live. Clearly a revolution. Then in the 1990s, you had the internet. If I close my eyes, I'll probably fall asleep. I didn't sleep that well last night, so I won't close my eyes. I can still remember the AOL phone thing, right? Where you'd connect to the phone line and you'd hit it, and then it would connect or not connect. You said, try again and try again. It was the dawn of the internet. My kids don't even think of the time when you couldn't go online. How many of you have been in a travel agency? There used to be these places called travel agencies, and when you wanted to make a plane reservation, you'd go into these places, and this agent would be sitting behind a terminal with access to all kinds of neat stuff that you didn't have. Okay? I want to fly from Sao Paulo to Orlando. And the agent looked very serious, said, that's a big, let me see what it's worth. And you can't see what's in the terminal. I found a really good price. You have no idea whether it's the best price or not. You know what? Those days are done, right? The internet changed the way we live. And then you get to the first decade of the century and you had the smartphone business. Of course, Blackberries came in before, but Blackberries were business things, right? I don't know, you remember Blackberry Thumb and you did it. But the Apple iPhone, clearly everybody was starting to get smart. People forget how much smartphone not only changed the way we live, but how many businesses are dependent on the smartphone. Without the smartphone, there is no Facebook and Twitter, right? I mean, if we were still dependent on computers to get on Twitter, far fewer people would get there. Without the smartphone, there is no DoorDash. You have DoorDash in Brazil or something equivalent? I've actually said that every company that went public that should be paying the smartphone companies a royalty because without them, you're nothing. Without a smartphone, how would you call your Uber? You'd go out of the building and say, Uber, and so hope that somebody hears you and comes out, right? It doesn't work without the smartphone. Clearly revolution. And then in the last decade, you had social media. And we're still figuring out. I've seen you and Elon have this issue with social media, but this is global social media playing out. Clearly changed the way we live, we work, we invest, we trade. 4 big disruptive changes, and the business effects is first, there will be new businesses built around each of these revolutionary changes. With computers, you had the first Dell, the Compaq, and they've effectively won the battle against IBM, which came in with potentially huge advantages. With the internet, it wasn't the established companies like AT&T and GE that did it. It was the new companies. And hence was born the Clayton Christensen thesis that disruption, when it happens, usually comes from outsiders rather than from the status quo. There's a reason for that, right? And I remember when in 1997, Barnes & Noble used to, there was a hugely successful book retailer, would come in, the CEO would come in and give a talk, and somebody asked him, what do you think about Amazon selling books? And he said, they'll never compete with us. It won't. And he said, are you starting an online? He said, we don't want to because it'll eat into our existing business. That's the problem with the status quo, is disruptors eat your business. So with AI, that's something I want you to start thinking about, because I think there's a potential for AI that rule doesn't apply. Because there are 2 things you need to be successful in AI. One is huge computing power, and the other is large amounts of data. And guess who has those? Who starts with an advantage? Huge computing power, large amounts of data. It's going to be the big tech company, right? So the question is, when you see this evolve, is it going to look like the last 4? One of the things I've learned is you learn from the past, but you don't live in the past. Things don't replicate. But you saw companies coming. All too often, we don't talk about the fact that every disruption creates damage. Damage in the status quo, companies. And in fact, we got to bring them into the net effect, right? There's good stuff, there's bad stuff, there's disruption. And for many companies, it becomes a cost component to their business. You got to build it into your costs, and if everybody builds into the cost, basically, nobody has an advantage. So in terms of personal effects, there will be a new workforce with skills around whatever that disruption is. I'm sure already at Stern there's pressure to add an AI minor. People learn nothing about AI, but they want the minor because they want to be in the AI space, right? So you're going to see that happen. And you're going to see job losses in traditional businesses. And we'll talk about where AI is most likely to create damaged jobs, because you want to steer away as far as you can from those jobs. Now, in terms of what it does for markets, because again, we're sold this, markets are going to go up because of AI. Let me look at the past. You look at the last 4 decades, you've had a big disruption. Have they been great for markets? It's been mixed. The overall effects on markets of these big revolutionary changes have been surprisingly muted. See, how can that be? Amazon's gone up so much in value. Because for every Amazon, think of all the brick and mortar retail companies that have crashed and burned. The net effect of disruptive change can actually be negative. And with AI, that's something to start thinking about. If AI plays out the way it is, and 10 years from now I look at markets, will they be higher? I'm not sure that AI is a net good for markets. It might make us better off as consumers, but it might not show up as higher profits and higher value. So when you think about disruptive change, and if AI is going to be disruptive change, and you're using that as your vehicle for pumping more money into equities, I'm going to hold you back and say, be careful, because historically, collectively, equities don't win. Some stocks will win, but collectively, it's surprisingly close to being a net zero. Now, of course, disruption's dark side. And I've always wondered why, when we write cases about disruption, we always write about the disruptors, like Uber. I'm still to find a good case study of a New York City cab medallion. You know that before Uber, there was car service. We forget this. It used to take the form of traditional cabs. In New York City, those traditional cabs were yellow cabs. And to drive a yellow cab in New York City, you had to buy a medallion. Those medallions in 2008 cost about $1.5 million to $2 million. Just the right to own it. Because you got a monopoly, right? There were 13,584 yellow cabs in the street, and the medallions kept the supply less than the demand, so you paid. You know what the cost of a New York City cab medallion was by 2015? $150,000. You couldn't give it away. There's a case study here among the disruptors. So while we see multiple case studies about Tesla, why aren't we seeing more case studies about Ford and GM and Volkswagen, which have crashed and burned as Tesla has risen? So when you think about disruption, the disrupted are going to be there. And if you're not careful and you're an investor, guess what? Those disrupted companies are going to look cheaper and cheaper to you. Because what are you doing? You're comparing them to their glorious past and saying, this company used to trade at 30 times earnings. I can buy it for 7 times earnings. It must be a cheap company. In investing, we call these value traps. They look cheap, you buy them, and they get cheaper. This is not the right direction. You buy more, they get even cheaper. And you keep buying them till they hit zero, saying, they look really cheap. But this is what happens when you have lazy investing approaches. Buy low PE stocks, buy low price to book stocks. The disrupted are going to feel the pain. And finally, if AI succeeds in its promise, that's a question we're going to ask. Who is going to be disrupted by it? So let's talk a little bit about that disruption in a minute. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the big market delusion. I'm going to set the stage. Are there big markets? Absolutely. The markets can be geographic. Why do we pay so much for Chinese companies, and now we're paying so much for Indian companies? Now they have the 2 highest PE ratios in the world, India and China. What is it about India and China that make them? 1 billion plus people. That's why it's not easy to replicate, right? It's not like Brazil can wake up tomorrow and say, we'll have 1 billion people, but how are you going to do that? 1 billion people geographically. Markets can be big because you think there's a lot of potential. Online retailing, big market. So the first component is big markets. You can see when you have big markets, people get excited. A big market, especially if it's early in the process. Second step in the process is a psychological issue. You see a big market, and you're an entrepreneur. Any of you know any entrepreneurs? Let me ask you a generic question about entrepreneurs. Do they tend to be diffident people or overconfident? They have to be overconfident, otherwise you wouldn't start a business, right? You think you're going to succeed. Thank you for entrepreneurs. We'll talk about what happens in a world without that. So you have a big market and you have an overconfident entrepreneur looking at the big market. So what does the entrepreneur think he or she can do? Start a business to conquer the big market. So what does that overconfident entrepreneur do? He seeks capital from this creature called a venture capitalist. Let me ask you a question about venture capitalists. They tend to be diffident people or overconfident? Incredibly overconfident. Way more overconfident than they should be. So here we have a cluster, right? You've got an overconfident entrepreneur with a business idea for a big market and overconfident venture capitalists providing with capital. You're saying, where is it going to show up? What's the nature of overconfidence? When I ask you to value your company, what do? You overestimate your market share, you overestimate revenues, profits, cash flows, and you value a company and you're going to overvalue a company. And remember, it's a big market. So while you're doing this, there are 100 other clusters like those, all of which are doing the same thing, each of which has an overconfident entrepreneur and overconfident VC. Do you see where this is going? Essentially, we have a pricing game where people are pricing companies based on their overconfidence, based on the big market, and you have 100 clusters, each of which is setting a price. Almost by definition, if I add up the collective pricing across these 100 companies, what am I going to find? I'm going to get too high a number because each one is overestimating the chance. This has happened in every big market in history. That's why I call it the big market delusion. It happened with PCs, it happened with the internet, it happened with smartphones, it happened with social media, and will happen with AI. I mean, think about the money flowing into AI. And what does it mean? It basically means that the collective value you get for all AI companies will be too high. And will the truth eventually come out? It always does. And when it does, what's going to happen? There's going to be a correction. And then we're all going to wring our hands and call it a bubble. Bubbles are a feature of big markets. They're not a bug. I always worry about regulators wanting to make bubbles go away. Bubbles always will happen. It's human nature when you have a big market. And I think it's a good thing because without it, nobody will be trying. If people were truly realistic, there wouldn't be enough businesses starting. You will never actually get to enjoy the change that comes from whatever that big development. So actually, a few years ago, I did a paper, and I won't go too much into it, but I took each big development and I looked at how it built up. And the correction, there's the dot-com bubble, right? Then, of course, it was followed by online advertising in 2015. Everybody's an online advertiser. Everybody overestimated the chance of success. So Snapchat comes on, so we'll be the next Facebook. Because the question is, how many Facebooks can there be in this space? There's not enough money being spent on advertising. And every one of these, in fact, in 2016, I took every online advertising company, I took the market cap of the company and reverse engineered what the revenues would have to be to justify it. 2 years ago, this was electric cars, right? You took every electric car company, you projected out, said, people aren't buying enough cars in the world to justify this pricing. Again, I don't think this is a problem, and I think anybody views it as a problem is missing the key link here. This is part of it. In fact, in 2018, when cannabis took off, almost every cannabis company was a Canadian cannabis company because in Canada it was legal. The US, it's a patchwork. I basically took all the cannabis stocks, I projected out the revenues. I said, look, everybody's got to be smoking cannabis all the time for this to happen, and I'm not sure I want to live in a world like that. I live in San Diego where I take my dog for a walk. We both come back high. It smells like skunk all over, right? Because that's what, so you go for a walk on the beach, you come back and say, you're kind of woozy, and the dog is stumbling saying, I'm woozy too, right? But this is the nature of big markets, is you're going to get these bubbles and the corrections, and cannabis happened as well. I will predict that the same things are going to happen with AI. And I'll make some of the things you're going to see. You're going to see companies go public, and you ask them, why are you worth so much? You know what the answer is going to be? AI is a big market. That's it. That's a whole story. Second, you're going to see absolute blindness to competition. You act like you're the only company in the world that's seeing all this stuff. You're going to do all this great stuff. It's almost like they've skipped the game theory part of class. You know, say, if I do this, what will they do? No, not even there. Third, it's all they talk about is scaling up. No talk about business models at all. And you're going to get pricing that's completely disconnected from fundamentals. It is going to happen. Don't bitch and moan about it. It has happened in every big market before. But I think it's a good thing. And when I wrote this, people said, how can a bubble be a good thing? My response was, do you want to live in a world run by actuaries? You guys know any actuaries? They're nice people, but very boring. Everything is, I said, probabilities, right? If the world were run by actuaries, we'd probably still be in caves. They're saying this fire thing, not fully tested yet. Let's wait a few more 1,000 years, and then you can go out and try this out. The nature of human development has always come from over-optimistic, overconfident people trying to do things that they had no business even trying. It's really too much of a stretch. And even after the bubble burst, it still changes the way we live, right? The dot-com bubble burst, but it changed the way we live. So next time you hear somebody saying there's going to be an AI bubble, my response is, so what? Of course there's going to be a bubble. I know it's coming. I know it's going to burst. But stop pointing to people and saying, you know, you terrible, shallow people, why are you creating this? This is the one thing about value investors that drives me crazy. They're like the old Puritans. You sinner. You buy tech companies. They have no book value. You deserve to rot in hell. And then they sit and pray that you go to hell. May all your stocks go to zero and may you go bankrupt. I think this is an Omaha prayer that they pray before them. Please push them all to zero and let Kraft, Heinz, and Coca-Cola rise to the top again. Okay? Stop wishing bad things on other people. You think it's a bubble, just stay away. Don't lecture people on it. If you don't want to invest in AI stocks, don't invest in AI stocks. But don't wag your finger at people investing in AI stocks, because they are the ones that are going to create the change that you will benefit from 10 years from now with your mature company. The big market delusion is always there, and AI is going to bring its strength. So I'm waiting. I have my popcorn ready, because this, to me, this is predictable. You're going to see the same kinds of things work out, and I think, you know, there will be a correction and a cleaning up. Doesn't mean that every AI stock is a bad investment, but collectively, AI will reflect all those things we've seen historically. So when you think about AI, my initial, before ChatGPT, I struggled with this. Is it revolutionary or is it just incremental change? Metaverse is incremental cloud. And I think for me, ChatGPT was that tipping point where I said, you know what, this isn't going to stop at the big tech companies creating products. This is going to permeate how we live. And I think it's just, and I think that's why ChatGPT, and that's how these things get triggered. It's something that you, in hindsight, say, that caused the shift, but it's out there, right? So when you think about different potential AI business, let me list a few. There will be money to be made in AI hardware. Somebody's got to provide the ammunition, the mechanics for those powerful computers. That's where Nvidia is right now, right? It's providing the chips, because without that computer, there will be a necessity for software. And you will see companies that provide. But remember, AI without those powerful computers, without the data, is kind of, there's nothing to look at. So that data part has to come in. So there will be data providers. And finally, there will be companies, and this will be the trickiest part of the AI business, who use AI to create products and services. I'll give you an example. You're a consulting firm. I start an AI consulting firm. Let's face it, most consultants read out of cookbooks, right? You can You can safely replicate a McKinsey report on supply chain if you've read 10 supply chain reports I've already read. They actually cut and paste. Sometimes I forget to change the name of the company. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But a lot of consulting is very much out of that cookbook. Well, I'll start a consulting firm. AI consulting, where essentially I can create a report that looks like a McKinsey report, reads like a McKinsey report, and I'm not paying a McKinsey consultant. Costly. Products and services. That's going to be a tougher business to make money in because there'll be other people essentially doing it. So you got to show me what's special about you. But if you think about all the AI companies that are going to come out, that they're going to come from that. Now, of course, the debate we're having with AI, of course, is what will the net effect be on society? Because here's what we've learned. Silicon Valley sells us a lot of stuff saying this is going to be good for you. It'll change the world, it'll make the world a better place. And 10 years later, you look back and say, not what I see. Right? With social media, of course, we're still wrestling with the downside. But with the internet, with smartphones, I mean, there's one of my colleagues, Jonathan Haidt, has written about depression in teenage girls, 13 to 14-year-olds. And he's argued that much of that is being driven by smartphones, social media, more with younger women than younger men. So he's just chronicling it. And he's arguing that anybody below the age of 16 should not be allowed to have a smartphone. I'll wager this will create a teenage revolution. We might not be safe in our own beds if we tried to pass this law. But you can see that smartphones have created consequences. Will AI have of course AI is going to have negative consequences. Will the net effect be positive? I don't know yet, right? Are we going to be better off in a world where AI does our writing for us and our... Sure, there's something that is going to be lost, and that's something we're going to be wrestling with as AI develops. But let's face it, it is not going to be easy to stop that effect with legislative or regulatory changes because the genie's out of the bottle, right? You can't stop it, but it's coming. And if you have young kids, this is something you're going to see. You're going to have to fight your kids on homework to make sure they're not using an advanced version of ChatGPT to do it. There's a whole world of pain that's going to come with AI that we haven't dealt with yet. And a whole set of skills we're going to lose because AI is going to do stuff. I'm glad I valued my first company with a calculator, a pencil, and a ledger sheet. Because there are things I learned that you don't learn now with an Excel spreadsheet doing all of those numbers. There's something learned that is lost. And that's something, I don't have that much time, but I want to talk a little bit about Nvidia. Every valuation I do on my blog is personal. I value companies I'm interested in. Frankly, I don't care what the rest of the world is interested in. So I don't value companies on demand. Let me take that back. There's one company I did called Blue Lagoon. About a few weeks ago, I get an email from Iceland. He said, have you ever valued this company called Blue Lagoon? It's a spa. It's a very well-known spa in Iceland. It's facing an existential risk. You know what it's facing? It's in the pathway of lava flowing from a volcano that's erupting. Now, if you're a spa, lava flowing through your grounds is not a great selling point, right? Come to our spa, get washed away by lava. It's not exactly what people come for. And the question was asking, can you value a company with catastrophic risk hanging over it? I told you I'm a dabbler. This is how I pick topics. I said, that's fascinating, because as human beings, we're not that good at dealing with catastrophic risk. So what do we do when there's catastrophic risk? We cover our eyes with catastrophic. And I started the post by saying, I shouldn't be the one writing about rational responses to catastrophic risk, because I live 2 blocks from the Pacific Ocean on one of the biggest earthquake faults in the world. I live in California. And I live in a house that I paid $2.5 million for. I'm clearly in denial here, right? An earthquake or rising sea, there goes my house. And I didn't build that in. And I think as human beings, we do that. And I think there's a reason for it. The reason we don't bring catastrophic risk into investing decisions, what exactly? Have you ever watched Mad Max, the Thunderdome, or one of those movies which are post-apocalyptic? Have Have you ever seen anybody check their stock portfolio in those movies? It's all about survival, right? So let's face it, if catastrophe happens, I'm not saying that my portfolio is not doing well. I'm just saying, where am I going to get my next meal? Will I make it through the next day? But the reality is when we do valuation, we ignore those catastrophic events. But Nvidia, I had a personal stake. In 2018, I bought Nvidia. I've actually valued because it looked cheap to me on an intrinsic value. It dropped to $30 per share. And people say, I wish I could buy Nvidia, but it's always been expensive. They're missing the point. In the last decade, it's actually been cheap 4 times. It's gone up and down. I got lucky. I would love to tell you in 2018 that I saw AI coming. I had no idea what AI even was. I got completely lucky. That $31 had hit $450 last summer, and I said, you know what? I need to take a look at Nvidia again. It looked cheap at 31, but it's at 450. And by then the AI buzz was happening, so I decided to value Nvidia with the AI buzz. So cutting a long story short, Nvidia is a semiconductor company, and historically semiconductor companies have gone up and down. It's an incredibly volatile sector, but it's also a maturing sector. The overall growth in this business is about 3, 4, 5%. So if you're a company in a mature business, normally it's very difficult to get high growth. And clearly, Nvidia has been the exception. So you look at Intel, you look at at AMD, they've struggled. But Nvidia seems to have stood out from the pack. So what has Nvidia done in the last decade that's allowed them to grow so, even before AI, that allowed them to grow so much more than the typical company? They caught two big waves at the crest. One was gaming as it was starting, and Nvidia made chips for gaming that were better than everybody else because they were first step. And then came crypto. Remember the height of Bitcoin mining, you need powerful computers, they fed into that. So when AI came along and they were first in, I said, once you can be lucky, twice you can be very lucky, but if you do this 3 times, this is part of a systematic business model that you have that allows you to get into big markets. So I like to give my stories names, and I called Nvidia my opportunistic chip maker. So built into my story is the good stuff that they've already done, the expectation that they can find more good stuff. You can take a look at the details of the valuation, but I broke Nvidia down into businesses with an AI business. And I said, how much is AI adding to value? So help me out here. If you want to value a chip maker who's making AI chips, and in 2023, when I did this valuation, the AI chip business was about 80 billion. The total market was 80 billion, and Nvidia had 75% of that market. High market share is good, right? But it's also bad. Why? Because growth is tough. If you have 75% market share, the overall market has to be growing. And luckily for Nvidia, the overall AI chip market is growing. To what? Who knows, right? And here I had to go looking for how big will the chip market be. So hang in there for the story. I went in and looked at how big, and I found 5 different estimates ranging from about 300 to 400 billion that the market would grow because more computers would be needed. And then I had to make a judgment call as to what will happen to Nvidia's market share. Remember I said every valuation there's a story, not just numbers. Why does Nvidia dominate the market right now? Because they were there first, and their chips are actually more powerful, more efficient than other companies. For 2 reasons. One is that chips were designed for AI. The other is they come bundled with software called CUDA. I'll be quite honest, when I first valued Nvidia, I knew none of these things. I'll talk about how I learned about those. But that bundling makes them incredibly efficient. But that's right now. So when you value Nvidia, what's the question you're asking? Everybody else is coming into this. It's only a question of time. AMD is trying, Intel's trying. The question is, when they come in, will Nvidia maintain a dominant market? And I believe it will, because I think there's some stickiness in the model. Let me explain. Let's say you started to build an AI system with Nvidia chips today. Let's say 3 years from now, you want to expand the system. Do you have to stay with the same chips, or can you switch chips? So I don't know the answer. I'm not an AI person, so I called around. It turns out that if you start a system around a company's chips, as you expand the system, it becomes easier to keep the same chip, because otherwise a lot of software has to get rewritten. whenever you look at companies with large market shares, that's often the question you're asking is competition is coming. What is the stickiness in this model that allow them? So I ended up giving Nvidia 60% market share of a $325 billion market. I thought I was being pretty upbeat. But the bottom line is, even if you allow for that and give them sky-high margins, the reason the margins are high is because unit economics works in their favor. They're a design company. They don't make the chips. Basically, they get to keep 50% of the revenue. I give them 50% margin. That story is now built in. The value that I got for Nvidia, even on the best of days, was about $400. Initially, about $300. Stock was trading at $450. So if I'm being true to my value investing philosophy, what should I do? Now my $30, the shares that I bought for $30, I should sell for $450 and say, thank you, God, for giving me all these returns and move away. I sold half my holding. I've heard the kind of pushback I got. I said, don't you believe your own valuation? And I said, look, I believe Nvidia is overvalued, but I also know the power of regret. And here's what I mean, the power of regret. Let's say you sell the shares at $450 and Nvidia goes to $850. You shouldn't be doing this. Sunk cost, but what are you doing? You sold at $450. And you know what? It's that regret can be incredibly damaging, not because of what it does to the past, but because it changes the way you invest in the future. I've known it. I've seen the damage it does. So you know why I sold half, right? Either way I win. It goes to $850, I look at the half that I can say, thank you, God, I kept half. It goes to $200, I say, thank you, God, for selling half. I know it's completely psychological, but investing, I've learned to live with my own decisions. So I sold half at $450. And you know what Nvidia did, right? Went to $850. And then I sold another half. I now own a quarter of the stock that I own. Have I left a lot of money on the table? Absolutely. Do I have any regrets? Not an ounce. Because I've changed my frame of reference. I bought the stock at 30. Why would I complain about selling at only 450? I'm looking at a glass half empty when I should be looking at a glass half full. In a lot of investing, we have to train our minds to have the right frame of reference. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing things you shouldn't be chasing. But my point with Nvidia was AI has been brought in, so you can't give me the AI story. Because that's what you ask equity research analysts. Why is Nvidia trading at $850? Oh, AI is a big market. I know it's a big market. I've given them a 60% market share. You better come up with a different story or another story to explain it. But this is going to happen as AI plays out. Companies are going to enter AI. The prices are going to go up. Analysts are going to say, that's okay because AI is a big market. My advice is go past that. Make your best estimates. Of course you're going to be wrong. And towards the end of this package, I introduce a tool that I've discovered helps me when I feel uncertain. We live in a world where we make point tests. You know what I mean by that? Value company, ask you, what's the revenue growth rate? And ask you for a number, 23%. And as you're giving me this number, your insides are screaming, but I could be wrong, I could be wrong. What if I let you tell me how wrong you could be? You see what I'm talking about? Give me your expected revenue growth. But tell me what's the range, what's the distribution? So instead of giving me a number, what if you could give me a distribution for revenue growth, a distribution for margin, a distribution for reinvestment, a distribution for the cost of capital? And what do I do with the distribution? You ever seen a Monte Carlo simulation? In Monte Carlo simulation, what you do is you take outcomes from each distribution, you value the company, then you do it again and again and again. I use a program called Crystal Ball, which is an add-on to Excel. You can take any Excel spreadsheet, evaluation of capital budgeting, and make it into a simulation if you're willing to do the work of putting distributions in for inputs rather than single. What you get as output is a distribution of value for Nvidia. Of course, if you have a distribution, what can you give? You can give me the median. That's your base. You can give me the 25th percentile. That's your low. 75th percentile. You can give me information of what is the chance in Nvidia. I actually did a Monte Carlo simulation for Nvidia. And at $450, I said there's an 83% chance it's overvalued and a 17% chance it's undervalued. So I'm not going to tell you there's no chance Nvidia is worth 450. I'm just saying the odds are not in my favor. Monte Carlo simulations allow you to take these estimates and convert. Essentially, you're taking uncertainty and saying, this is how uncertain I am. And that's both more honest and it gives you more ammunition to make better decisions. So if you, and I won't go through the Nvidia valuation, you can go through it. My blog post on Nvidia is out there. Now, I want my next three companies will be Microsoft, which clearly is a company that benefits, Adobe, and maybe ARM, which is a pure, AI chip company. That's a company that just went public last summer. But as AI companies come on, my objective is not rule out AI, talk about it not being there, but think of ways in which I can bring it. I want to give you a chance to ask questions, so I'm going to open up for any questions you might have. You can ask, doesn't have to be about AI. As I said, I'm a dabbler. You can ask me about sports teams and how they're priced. You can ask me about ESG, but then I won't go on a rant. No. But ask me whatever you want. You go ahead. Yeah. What does the IT proposition say? What is Elon Musk worth to? If I asked you, how much is Elon Musk worth to or taking away from Tesla's value? How would you go about doing it? History is not going to help you, right? Historically, he's always been around. So what's the question asking? If he's gone, what? So basically, you'd have to, well, I wouldn't be so quick to judge because you'd have to value the company twice, right? So once with the person in it, once without. I actually wrote a blog post on key people in companies. This is not new. In private businesses, there's a discount called a key person discount, which is if you buy a business where the person running the business or owning the business is central to the business, a lot of personal service, plumbing business, a medical practice. You can't pay based on what you see in the financials because when that person leaves, a big chunk of the revenues might leave. So basically, the mechanics are simple. Value the company with and without. With Elon Musk, does he bring anything good to Tesla? No, he brings, let's face it, this guy is vision pouring out of every orifice of his body, right? He has more vision than the other 499 S&P 500 CEOs put together. And that's been central to Tesla's value. You can't use the benefit of hindsight. Without him, there would be no Tesla, let's be quite honest. And it's obvious that it's something that vision thing is a big strength, right? Because you look at, you look at everything, every other company is created, it's been built around seeing things that other people think are impossible now. So clearly there's a plus. What's his minus? Or the minus of having it? He seems to get distracted fairly easily, right? A Thai diver does something, you tweet out, what is wrong with you? You buy Bitcoin for $500 million, you're distracting me. Now, when I bought Tesla in 2019 because it was cheap. It had been going through a period very much like now. Everybody had given up. I bought it at 180. And at the time that I bought it, I described it as my corporate teenager. You guys are not that far separated from your teenage years. But remember when you were a teenager, what did you do every day? Get up, look in the mirror and say, I have lots of potential. What can I do today to screw it all up? And that's what teenagers do, right? This is why somebody who gets admission to Harvard then goes right to a stupid social media post that leads to, what were you thinking? The definition of teenagers, you don't think, right? Your time horizon is like 30 seconds and there's this attracting looking person across the room. Your brain goes into some strange zone and you do. And I said, when I buy Tesla, I'm buying the corporate teenager. And what I was talking about is the fact that I buy Tesla, I buy a company with lots of potential, but one man will get up every morning, look in the mirror and say, what can I do today? But you get the package, right? You get the vision plus the distraction. You can't have the good side alone. These are human beings. For Berkshire Hathaway, a company for 60 years, what's a big thing that sustained the value? Warren Buffett, right? The name. Berkshire Hathaway used to trade at 3 times the price-to-book ratio of a typical insurance company. Why? Because every insurance company actually can be has two businesses. One is the insurance business, where your success is judged based on premiums that you collect and the way you assess risk. But every insurance company has also got a closed-end mutual fund right on the side because they take the money and invest it. In most insurance companies, the closed-end fund is kind of neutral. But Berkshire Hathaway is an insurance company, Geico, with the best known and the best regarded portfolio manager in history running the closed-end fund. And closed-end funds can trade at a premium. That premium was 200% in 1999. You know what that premium is now? It's gone. It's been gone for 10 years. Why? When you have a human being component to your value, there is a problem, right? You get older. How old is Buffett? Really old. 92, I think. In fact, remember, next year there won't be a pair of people in the front. It used to be Buffett and Munger. Now it's going to be Buffett. And soon there'll be nobody there. And the market has already started to price it in. 10 years ago, Warren Buffett actually said officially that he was no longer picking stocks. He actually picked his successors, Ted Wexler, and he said, they're going to be the ones picking the stock. But we still hold on to the illusion that Warren Buffett is back there. I've offered people a prize. I said, I would like you to go to the next meeting and get up and ask Warren Buffett what Snowflake does as a company. Snowflake is a company that Berkshire Hathaway bought 5 years ago. It's a software company. It's a money-losing company. I'll wager Warren Buffett has no idea what Snowflake does because he didn't pick the stock. Ted Wexler did. Why? Because it's FOMO. Everybody else was making a lot of money. He jumped in. He bought the stock. But people are part of companies. When you do the cash flows for a company, embedded in there are whatever the human capital, not just the CEO, but everybody in the company. Some companies, they add very little. I remember going into Coca-Cola and valuing the company, and I don't care who the CEO of the company is. I don't care who runs the company. This is a company that ChatGPT could run. Right? It's a brand name, essentially, put it out. For some companies, the human capital doesn't matter. In some companies, it matters a lot. And if it matters a lot, it should already be in your cash flows. And the risk there is, you're too dependent on one or two or three people that cash flow could be affected by them. So do the common sense thing. If you feel a person is central to the value of a company, ask yourself what would happen without that person. There's a reason OpenAI went into contortions when Sam Altman. Remember that brief episode where the board of directors tried to replace him and then Sam Altman replaced the board of directors? So basically, it kind of got reversed. Because let's face it, OpenAI without Sam Altman is a collection of geeks who can talk about AI, but they can't run a business. So basically, you have too much money now at stake at OpenAI. There's no way I'm letting some engineer from MIT who geeks out on how great AI is or how noble AI is, run that space. So if you have a company where a person or persons are involved, that's already built into cash flows, and sometimes people can let you down. 10 years ago, 3G Capital, where you're an investor, you said, that's amazing, I'll put a premium. Today, 3G Capital is an investor, you might put a discount. Assessments change, convictions change, and you have to adjust. Yes?
Told the story that you started doing valuation by analyzing Amazon.
Young company valuation.
As a young company,
Yeah.
right? So in today's scenario, would you also see Amazon as a potential, not only a big tech, but a company who is not on the radar and can also become a
When you have
surprising
$2 trillion in market cap, you're definitely on a lot of people's radar. So that's not Amazon's issue anymore, right? The question is, what does Amazon do? In 1997, when I valued Amazon, I valued it as an online retailer. That's a story I told. In fact, I called it the Field of Dreams story. You've seen the movie Field of Dreams? It's a movie where Kevin Costner builds a baseball field in the middle of Iowa, and people say, why are you building a baseball field here? And he uses one of the most famous lines in moviedom, which is, if we build it, they will come. Which is the Amazon story all on. We'll build the revenues, the profits will come, and they did it really well. Jeff Bezos was an extraordinarily consistent and good storyteller, and he brought markets along. But if they'd stayed an online retail company, they'd have leveled off 10 years ago. Somewhere in 2011 or 12, you saw the pivot happen, where they went from being an online retail company to what I call a disruption machine. Here's how I see Amazon. They look for businesses that are soft. Soft in what sense? Both the producers and the consumers have gotten used to doing what they're doing, often for very high fees. They enter the business and they destroy the status quo. Now, the way I describe Amazon is, I don't care what business you're in, but if Amazon enters your business, you're already going to be a less valuable company the minute it enters, because your business is going to get more competitive, lower margin. So Amazon now is a disruption machine, which makes it one of the most difficult companies in the world to face. Because you're a disruption machine, what's your total potential market? Everything, right? You could be huge, but with Amazon, the biggest risk you face is not from competition. I don't think any competitor can take Amazon head to head and win in the long term. What's going to stop Amazon? What are all these competitors doing? They're going to the government and say, please stop this company. It's getting too big, too powerful. My biggest worry with Amazon, if I'm an investor, is that there's going to be regulatory pushback at Amazon that stops them from growing. That's already happening in some parts of the world, but that's got to be built into your story. But it is a disruption machine now. It's not in one business, it's in 6 or 7 or 8 businesses. It's the largest logistics company now in the US. Right? Amazon owns more trucks than UPS does, delivers more packages than UPS does. It's a media company, right, with Amazon Prime. So you go down business it's a cloud company because it's got Amazon Cloud. Starting to get more and more businesses essentially. Now I hope, if you're a university, let's face it, universities are the softest businesses in the world. They're incredibly inefficient. We get away with it. Why? Because for 1,000 years we've been a monopoly. I went into the University of Bologna, which is one of the first universities in the world, 1,000 years ago. And I walked into one of the original classrooms, and my first reaction was, this looks just like the classrooms. But that monopoly is breaking. It's breaking because you can get classes online. You don't have to physically be in Bologna or at NYU to get a class. An incredibly inefficient business. At least in the US, think of how much we charge people to go to school. Yale, I think this year was $100,000 a year, tuition, housing, everything put together. That's obscene. If this were any other business, you'd be putting the money, give me my money back. Universities deserve to be disrupted. I've tried disrupting from within, but I'm not Amazon. If Amazon University shows up, every university should sit up and say, something's happening. So the disruption machine, you've got to value it as such. Doesn't mean it's difficult. Yeah, go. In AI specifically, I don't think they have an advantage, but there are two things. There are 2 companies in the world that have collected data. Remember we said data is a big part of AI success. There are 2 companies that are very, very exclusive. Remember, it's not just data. It's got to be exclusive data, right? If it's data that anybody can get, no particular advantage. So what's the exclusive data that Amazon has collected about you? Everything you've done, every product you've looked at, not even bought, they know, right? And if you have Alexa in your house, Amazon knows a lot more about you than you do. Right? They've listened in on your children talking about you. As kids don't like it. We know that, right? So when we sell them products, we'll sell them based on that. It's collecting unique data. The other company, of course, that's collecting data on you as you work with them is Netflix. Kind of terrifying on Netflix because they remember not just the shows you watch, but the shows you stop watching 20 minutes in. You see it at that time. And that then becomes input into how they create new shows. Now, their objective is to get you to watch the same show over and over for the rest of your life. Once they've discovered what you like, they'll have variants of it. We make it a Korean, then a Japanese. So basically, I know the show you like, we'll deliver that same show. It's a terrifying future, but I think Amazon does have a data advantage, but I think that they will hold back on AI until they figure out what, they're not going to go into the chip business. That's not it. So if they're going to do it, it's going to be AI products and services, but they're going to wait to see how that business evolves. It's too early for them to jump in. Their history is not to be first, but to wait for other people to get there, screw up, and then you come in and say, we'll do it right. So my guess is they'll be slower in coming up with AI products and services. They might use it internally to do better retailing, but I don't think they're going to be first. Yes?
First of all, thank you for the class. I was wondering how you make a valuation on companies that dependent on data. People say that data is the new oil, but you don't have a CME future contract for data, a pound of data or such a thing. So how can you go about
I'm sorry, what? So the question is, how do you value data?
value?
What's the word that I use that makes data valuable for Amazon? The word exclusive, right? If data is not exclusive, I guarantee you, there's no value. Because everybody will have it. I mean, I'd say this all the time in my class. People get tired of it. Everybody has it. Nobody has it. The problem with big data is much of big data everybody has. I remember when, I don't know whether this ever happened in Brazil, but in San Diego, used to, we got these bikes and scooters, which you could, the apps, Lime, and I remember when they came out, I said, how does this business ever make money? It is a really stupid business model. Because in San Diego, you know what happened to a quarter of the scooters? Teenagers, at the end of the day, would throw them off the cliffs into the ocean. Talk about a pollution cost. But for the business, you're wiping out 1/4. So you'd see bikes in trash cans. Just, there's no way you're making money. So I asked one of the VCs in the Lime business, and I said, how do you justify this? He said, it's a data business. I said, what data? He said, we know what you get on a Lime bike and when you get off the Lime bike. I said, you think you're the only one who knows that? There are 26 apps on my iPhone that know it at the same time. Yelp seems to know. Google definitely knows. Apple knows. There's nothing exclusive about it. It's amazing how asking that exclusive question trips this big data part. You know what Kroger's argument for AI is? We can see what you're buying. And then we will devise menus for you based on what you're. Really? This is your big innovation? And for this, I'm going to pay you a premium. You see me buying steak every evening, you're going to give me steak menus, and I'm going to pay a premium for this. It's not happening, right? So there is valuable data and there's not. So ask that exclusivity question. You'll be amazed at how few companies can actually benefit from data. It's, again, it became a buzzword for a while, big data. Big data, for the most part, is worthless data because everybody has it. Yes?
Thank you. But more specifically about like AMD, Intel, Qualcomm. I don't know if you've seen, but they're much more into this. Like,
but back up. Why am I very heavy into Nvidia? Because I think they're cheap today. Because I bought them at a really low price.
oh, because you bought it a really
Purely accidental, right? So second, no investment in my portfolio ever exceeds 10% of my portfolio. That's a rule I have. Which means Nvidia can never become 60%. Partly because I prune it, and partly because whenever you concentrate your portfolio, you're kind of making a bet that you know more than the rest of the world, and the market will correct to what you know. I am not that confident in anything I do to make that bet. So first, Nvidia is not a big part of my portfolio, and it got there when it was a $30 stock. So today, if I were picking a semiconductor company, I might pick AMD. So if you force me to, which is the cheapest, they might all be overvalued, but AMD might be less over, Intel might be even less overvalued. So if the question is about what semiconductor company would I buy today, collectively I'd probably avoid them because the AI buzz has pushed them all up too much. But the cheapest of the semiconductor companies will be a no-name company, right? A company that doesn't seem to benefit. And right now, I think Intel, AMD are probably all cheaper than Nvidia. So I wouldn't. So today, the choice I would make would be very different. because remember, investing is at the right price. It's not about the right company, it's the right price. I will buy any company at the right price. No matter how horrendous the company is, how terrible it is. I will avoid any company at the wrong price, no matter how great it is. We need to separate great companies from great investments. Again, I had another blog post. Again, I was thinking about this one day. So why do we have great companies that are terrible investments and terrible companies that are great investments? Because it's the pricing that determines whether something is right. So I'll turn it back to you. I'm sorry I interrupted, but keep going.
I mean, you practically got the question that I wanted to ask you, but yeah, it was basically what you thought was the best.
Okay.
Maybe Qualcomm in the mix. I don't know.
And I think that in a sense, you got to bring the price in. Cannot talk investing without bringing in the pricing, right? We need less discussion of greatness of company and more discussion of how these companies. Yes.
When you made that speak about stocks that you buy and it keeps getting cheaper, I immediately remember about Alibaba, and I think that's you can apply that to AI too. When you have a company that
But Alibaba is a very unique case, right? Let's go back. I valued Alibaba at the time of its IPO. First, does everybody know what Alibaba does? What is Alibaba's business? E-commerce is too generic. So what exactly in e-commerce does it do? Sorry, what? You know, Alibaba is not Amazon. It's not an online retailer. Alibaba is an intermediary. Basically, it doesn't carry any inventory. So it's a place where Chinese retailers can go and Chinese consumers can buy. You say, how does Alibaba make money? Every transaction that happens on the platform, they make 0.01% of the transaction. But they have a huge amount of revenue. So in 2014, when I valued Alibaba, I valued it as the China story, a true China story, because 75% of all online retail traffic in China flowed through an Alibaba site, Taobao or Taomao. And it had one more thing going for it, which is not only did it dominate the Chinese retail space, it had the Chinese government in its corner as an ally. You know what changed between 2014 and 19? And this wasn't just Alibaba. The Chinese government, which is part of every Chinese company's story, went from being ally to adversary. Why do you think they did that? Why did Beijing go from being a friend to Alibaba and Tencent and JD to being an adversary? What is it? It was all about power. I mean, let's face it, Beijing couldn't care less about consumers. Right? This is not a government that cares about what consumers and people. The People's Republic of China has nothing to do with people or republic. It's just about Beijing. Right? It's all about power. And you know what what the Beijing was afraid of? You have 400 million people on the Tencent platform, 350 million people on the Alibaba platform. What if they turn against us? We've got to stop it. That is the big change in the story. That's why people invest in Alibaba, and Charlie Munger did. It looks cheap relative to history because during that history, it was not just the growth, the fact that you're a big part of your story has shifted. And this is a problem. I've always been reluctant to invest in Chinese companies because no matter which Chinese company you pick, the Chinese government is part of the story. So this is as much a political and a power bet as it is about a bet about the company. With Alibaba, the government has gone in. Initially, people said it's because they don't like Jack Ma. But let's face it, he disappeared for like 3 years, and they still hated on the company. So this goes beyond Jack Ma. So at this stage, people are saying, no, this is it. This is the way the company is going to be. It's going to be a mature company because if it tries to grow, the government will stop it. And along the way, it'll extort money from the company. It might call it taxes, it might call it a regulatory fee, a voluntary contribution. It's nothing voluntary about it, but they will take him. And that's being built into the valuation. So unless you have connections with Beijing, I would avoid Alibaba because it's going to be all about what does Beijing think about you. Yes? Can I tell you a story? I mean, this is something that is personal. What is AI going to do better than you or I can? The Damodaran bot, what can it do better than my very best student in my class? You know how many pages I've written on my blog? Probably last time I checked, 2,500 pages over the last 14 years. Imagine being a human being, even 2,500 pages and holding on to all of that. I don't even remember how many companies I value. You could go through every company, but most of them are going to come and go because you're getting AI can read 2,500 pages. It can look at every company valuation, and it can keep it all intact in its memory because its memory, in a sense, is infinite. You know what AI will do better than a human being? It can, any part of the process that's mechanical, it'll beat you. A machine is always going to be more efficient in mechanical stuff than you and I can because machines don't make stupid mistakes. They don't get tired. They don't run out of coffee. Basically, they're just always highly caffeinated and highly observant. I mean, many of you are going out looking for jobs. One thing I would advise you to do is when you get your jobs, wherever you work, keep track of how much of what you do every day is mechanical. You come in, you open the same spreadsheet, you enter the same numbers. If 80, 85, 90% of what you do is mechanical, get down on your knees and say, please find me another job. Because it's only a matter of time before AI or something, you can call it whatever you want, will replace you. So if you're looking for a way to make yourself necessary in this world where AI is going to do mechanical stuff, what do you need to do? You need to find some component that's you. AI is not going to be good. I'll tell you the parts the Damodaran bot will have trouble with. Sometimes I look at two unrelated facts, what are called aha moments. Have you ever had those where you see something, connection here? That's what human beings do. AI is not good at aha moments. So when you have an aha moment, hold on to it because you can manufacture these moments if you keep. That's why I said think more, read less. Because what thinking for me is, I often in the morning when I read a news story, take the dog for a walk. Why? Because the dog has to pee. It's a 3-mile walk, and while we walk and get high, at the same time, involuntarily, I think about the news story I read. And another news story I read, and something from the past. And what I'm trying, while I don't consciously do it, I'm looking to see whether I can find that connection, that aha moment. Almost every one of my blog posts comes from stories that are unrelated. So the Iceland story converged with this 23andMe. So have you heard of this company called 23andMe? This is the company where you can send in your saliva. I don't think they ask you for your blood, but some part of your DNA, and then they give you your genetic makeup. I think they make up crap, but people do it. And then about 6 months ago, they had a horrendous problem. You know what happened? Somebody hacked into their computer and got all that DNA stuff, that 7 million customers. Catastrophic event, right? Just like the volcano erupting. So I'd read that story a couple of days ago. I get this email from the Icelandic reader about Blue Lagoon. And then at the same time, I'm also thinking about the fact that this climate change thing is not working. You know what I mean by that, right? If you look at this, COP1, COP2, what are you, COP28? If we'd been listening, we should all be in, our fossil fuel should have gone away. But it seems like we've stopped listening. So I said, why is that happening? It's going to be a potentially catastrophic event. It should be showing up in valuation. So all these things came together into that post on, hey, what is it about catastrophic events? How do they build them into value? Why, as investors and as businesses, do we choose to look the other way? And one of my conclusions was, you think climate change is the existential problem? Stop telling people it's too late. Stop telling people there's not, because that's like telling somebody who has 6 months to live, smoke less, drink less, live. You have 6 months to live. What do you care? At this point, a lot of people are looking at the story saying, hey, this climate change is here. The world is going to get hotter. Nothing I can do. So you know what? I'm going to drive an SUV. I'm going to drink big cappuccinos. I'm going to create as much fossil fuel. There's nothing I can do. I said, even if you are a person who believes that climate change is an existential problem, you've got to frame it in a way that people think they can still make a difference. And that's what the climate change people don't get, right? They're so caught up in telling you how terrible you are as a person for creating a carbon footprint. I mean, when I made my United reservation, this is true probably when you make a reservation on LATAM, right below the reservation it says, do you want to contribute $4.99? I have never done that. I will never do that. Because first, it's the biggest scam on the face of the earth. This money, if you think it's planting a tree in a rainforest or Oregon, it's going into somebody's pocket. But this is the worst kind of way to, because in a sense, what does it let you do? Do bad things and then alleviate your guilt. That's my biggest problem with ESG. ESG was a way in which people could all day create a huge fossil fuel footprint and then, or a carbon footprint, come in at the end of the day, buy an ESG fund, say, okay, look, I've made the world okay. This is not the way, I mean, and that's exactly the kind of practice we've encouraged. So, long story, it's a collection of things, and effectively, I mean, during the walk, this is the aha moments. This is what connects them. So what you're looking for is strengthening that skill, because that is what's not going to be easy to do. So no matter what you do, think of those aha moments where you connect things that look unrelated and work on doing more of that. Yes?
In China, on the Alibaba answer, since pandemics, we see the country with lower exportations number, and also with a lower growth of GDP and also a deflation. How can you see the position of China in the next years and how this will affect the whole world?
First, why is China growing at a much lower rate than 10 years? But there's a very simple answer. Why is it growing at a lower rate?
The market share that you cannot
Because you need the
expand on.
second largest economy in the world. You can't grow at the same rate as when you're the 10th largest. This has been coming for a long time. So when people said China can keep growing at 10% a year for the rest of eternity, my point is you've forgotten your math. Because if we let China grow at 10% a year in a global economy that's growing 3% a year, mathematically what's going to happen in about 20 years, we're going to be all China. And then what? Other planets? Right? I mean, and that's always been the problem. So some of this is just a long-term scaling up effect. Some of it is the fact that the Chinese system, every system has its weakest links. When times are good, we don't notice them. The Chinese system has strengths, but it also has its weakest links. And now we're seeing those weakest links. One being how much Chinese companies are at the mercy of the Chinese government. We've always known that, but when times were good, we looked the other way. And now we're recognizing that when you invest in a Chinese company, if the Chinese government decides to put its hands on the scale, you have no counter. What are you going to do? Sue in a Chinese court? You're not going to win. It's just, it's not like Amazon suing the US government in the Supreme Court. Amazon has a chance of winning if it can show that this is not. The Chinese government says, we don't like you. They don't like you. So I think what you're seeing now is weaknesses that have always been there that now at a 5% growth are becoming more visible. So on top of that, you also have the politics of this, which is also roiling the boat. But I think that this has been a long time coming. The pandemic might have been a tipping point, but it would have happened anyway.
A lot was talked about Nvidia, AMD, but there are other companies like in the semiconductor sector, like the EDA companies, the IDMs, like Samsung and Synopsys, Cadence Design Systems. Have you ever looked at it? Does it has the same premium like for the AI?
Of course it does. Right? We know that. I mean, when you have a $2 trillion company surrounded by $100 billion, $200 billion companies, clearly the $2 trillion company is getting a premium that none of the other companies are getting, right? That doesn't mean the other companies are cheap and you're going to buy them, but clearly the AI buzz is strongest with Nvidia because it's captured the story. Right now, when I asked you what you think about Jensen Huang, what's your answer? Greatest CEO ever, right? Watch him on CNBC. People almost worship at his feet. I've seen this movie before. I saw this with Jack Welch at the peak of GE's success. And then I saw the mistakes he made show up 15 years later. I'm not saying Jensen Huang is not a great manager. He's a great manager, but he's a human being. He has his own blind spots. Right now, we're not noticing what those blind spots are, but they will get visible. Because now at a $2 trillion value, I've made a bet on you that is so large. And this is the problem with expectations, right? When I expect you to be the greatest CEO on the face of the earth, which is what Nvidia is being priced at, what's the upside? And think about all the potential downsides. Because all I can get is disappointment. That's what I said. At the right price, I would buy any company. So all of these companies are being priced based on expectations. Nvidia is being priced on sky-high expectations. Intel on, basically, the pricing seems to reflect the fact that people don't think Intel will ever make get a piece of the AI business for whatever reason. That they're not positioned for it, their design is not as effective. And in fact, it's missed out on all three of the businesses. Gaming, in fact, AMD is the only other company that's played along these businesses. So maybe they're right. But if you want to make a bet that Intel's going to change its ways and become part of the business, maybe that's the best company. A question?
Taking lately could oppose to the global economy.
I'll be quite honest. Name me one great innovative company that has come out of Europe in the last. Maybe Spotify, but even Spotify gets its oxygen from the US market. The EU is behaving just like it's an aging, declining continent, fighting to hold on to whatever it can. But let's be honest, if the whole world were run by the EU, there would be none of these things that they're regulating would even exist in the first place. And if I were the tech companies, I'd just pull out of Europe. So you guys deal with it yourself. See how it works. If you have no Apple, no Google, let's face it, without it, what are the Europeans going to do? So maybe it's time to take on the EU head on and say, I'm not playing your game. I know you're a big lucrative market, but the kinds of, and it's silly. Have you ever been in Europe trying to get on a website? They make you jump through like 5 hoops. You've got to sign away this and sign in this. And just to open a web page. So you know what you start doing, right? Check, because you want to get to the web page. You don't even read, I accept before you do this. But EU is great on performative. That's why in the environmental space, they're out there. They're doing things, and at the end of it, the net effect on climate change is close to zero. You can play all these regulatory games. So is the EU out there in terms of regulatory overlay? Absolutely. So we're doing it. Will it have an effect on society's problems? I don't think so, but makes them feel better. Let them. Yes.
There's a lot of discussions around the TSMC new factory in Arizona. So on unit economics, what do you think it's the chance of the company producing chips at a competitive price at that factory?
You know why they're opening it in Arizona? What did I say? You get exposed to the China, right?
And what are the implications in the long term in case the factory won't be able to produce chips at a competitive price?
Well, I don't think they'll have a problem getting the competitive price. I think that there's nothing specific. This is not a heavily labor cost-driven business,
but how
right?
about economies of scale? I read that you need a huge factory.
It might take a while, but I think I can see why they're doing what they're doing. Initially, those chips might be more expensive, but the way they see it is, as a company, we're actually going to get more valuable by having our next chip factory. I'm surprised they didn't put it in Vietnam rather than Arizona. But the reason they put it in Arizona is the tax law changed last year actually gives you credits and benefits for having a U.S. company. They're getting ahead of US restrictions on tariffs on chips made elsewhere. So there's a bunch of factors driving the Arizona location, but I can see why they want to leave Taiwan as their central location. It's too country exposed as a company, and you worry about it.
Hi, Professor. Changing the subject a little bit, I would like to ask you about the valuation of Brazilian companies, especially Vale and Petrobras, and the valuation of Brazilian stock markets in general.
I don't value the market overall, so I will leave the second. I value the S&P 500 because I'm not a market timer. I'm not that interested in overall market value. I have valued Vale now 15 years and Breyer for 20 years, Petrobras off and on. In fact, my most read post of all time was my Petrobras post from 2014. I've heard a lot about, which is, remember that 2014 Petrobras had hit absolute rock bottom. They'd gone from 200 billion to 40 billion, and I said, if you were running a company with a very perverse objective function, you know what I mean by perverse, right? You run companies to maximize value, but let's say somebody replaces the word maximize with minimize. I said, this is a case study of what happens when you take every corporate finance first principle and flip it on its head. So rather than take projects that earn more than your hurdle rate, you take only projects that earn less than your hurdle rate. Rather than finding the debt mix that minimize your cost of capital, you find the debt mix that maximize your cost of capital. Rather than paying out what you can afford to pay in dividends, you pay out what you can't afford to pay in dividends. I said in this cycle, and then I said, but if you're saying, why would people do something as absurd as that? I traced it back to corporate governance. Who are you keeping happy? In a traditional publicly traded company, who do you have to keep happy? Shareholders in the company, but let's face it, that has never been the objective in Petrobras. It is two classes of shares. If you buy Petrobras shares, you get the preferred shares. The common shares are held by 6 entities, one of which happens to be the government. With a golden share, right? They have veto power over decisions. Now, I might be speaking out of turn here, but if you're the CEO of Petrobras, there's only one person you need to keep happy, which is the Minister of Finance in Brasilia, or the President, if that's the case. And not surprisingly then, you're going to do, and let's face it, the start of that decade, there was a message that came out of Brasilia that said, we want to make Petrobras the largest oil company. So if you're the CEO and you hear that, what's your end mission? You want to make Petrobras the largest oil company. So what are you going to do? You're going to go look for oil everywhere, even if it doesn't make sense. And they did that really well, right? And in the process, the value. And I said, this is what happens, and this is not an indictment of Petrobras' management. This is what happens when your corporate governance gets skewed, because your missions are going to drive how you approach the business. I think Petrobras has righted some of those wrongs. It's much better run. It's changed its practices. But it took that near-death experience and a lot of management change before that happened. Vale is a commodity company. And remember, we talked about China. China, in a sense, distorted the commodity business for a decade. Between 2003 and 2013, demand from China for iron ore, because they were infrastructure building, pushed the price of iron ore to levels not seen in the last century. And every company in the space, not just Vale, got used to these very high iron ore prices. They said, and then the bottom fell out. And initially, when the bottom fell out and iron ore prices dropped, they said, oh, it's a cycle. We'll go back to where we're. The only problem was, you were not going back to the 2004, 2013 average. You were going back to a more normalized. And it's taken Vale a while to get there. And this is a company you can use as a case study. What happens when you let your social costs explode and not take care of that problem? Because along the way, they've had these catastrophic events which have destroyed part of the reputation of the company. And they're still trying to work their way through. It's tough when you create those. So if there's an argument to be made for being good, really the argument should be don't be bad. Because if you play too close to the edge, eventually it catches up with you. And Vale is a classic example of playing too close. I mean, they might have been legally on the right side of the line. They were close enough that one mistake, one bad move, they went to the other side of the line, and it takes a long time to make you. So I bought Vale, I think, when iron ore prices had dropped, assuming that they would bounce back. So I screwed up on two fronts. One is I assumed iron ore price, and second, I assumed that country risk would revert back to normal. And what I didn't realize, for 4 years, you guys kept making country risk worse and worse and worse. You found new ways for me to plumb the depths. So 2 years into this, I threw up my hands, I sold Vale, and the blog post I titled was "No Mas, No Mas," and I heard from a lot of Portuguese saying, "That's Spanish." And I saying, "You're missing the point." Okay? This is a Roberto Duran. I mean, if those of you track boxing, you know Roberto Duran, this famous Panamanian fighter, had this fight with Sugar Ray Leonard, where 4 rounds in, he said no mas, and he gave up. And I said, I'm basically giving up. I screwed up, and I got the country risk wrong. I got the commodity wrong. I got the currency wrong, and I did buy back Vale when it hit like $3, and it's still in my portfolio, but it's one of my commodity companies. I'm not expecting it to do anything with AI. AI and iron ore don't mix together. I don't expect big data to help them. This is an old-fashioned commodity bet. I need some commodity companies. It fills that space. Petrobras is back in there too, and it fills the space. So those are my 2 Brazilian companies. Saying, how about some young high-growth companies? I'd like to see a high-growth Brazilian company climb the ranks. This morning I was looking at the top 20 Brazilian companies. I think the closest you get to high growth is Nubank, right? As a fintech company. Every other company, old-time, mature, either a banking company or a commodity company, And I think that's something I would like to see more in Brazil, young companies climbing up the ranks to get to the top, like Nvidia does in the US, right? 4 years ago, it was nowhere in the picture. Now it's at the top. The FANGAM stocks, basically over a decade, because that's what gives vitality to a market. Companies kind of taking off, because that's what creates excitement. Otherwise, you're playing the same companies over and over again. But I think Brazil still has a corporate, in spite of trying to fight the old corporate, still has a corporate governance issue. And you've created a new market where you basically tell me there are better corporate governance rules, but the proof is in the pudding. How many Brazilian managers get replaced every year? That's the ultimate test of corporate governance. The answer is not very many. And until you see more displacement of CEOs being pushed out, I want to see what I saw at Disney last week. Right? The largest entertainment companies, long-time reputation, and an activist shows up and Nelson Peltz ended up losing the game, but he engaged the management. The management changed. They repackaged ESPN. They changed the way the companies run because they knew if they didn't, they would lose that battle. I want to see that happen at more Brazilian companies. Corporate governance is just basically somebody in the mix saying things are not working correctly. Let's challenge the status quo, challenge the way things are done. I don't think there's enough of that at Brazilian companies, and more will probably create more dynamic companies that do better.
Professor?
Yep. There.
Well, unfortunately, we are coming to the close of the section. I have one last question.
Yep.
Daniel Kahneman has just passed away, and I'd like one word about his contribution to the valuation and for finance and economics.
The overconfidence part that I introduced into big market delusion that came from Daniel Kahneman. When Daniel Kahneman was a psychologist, he was not an economist. Because you put yourself on a pedestal and you put other people down there, and then what can you talk of that's of substance? In CNBC, every time I get on, especially for the last few times, there's market in a bubble. What is it that I will gain by telling you the market's in a bubble? You're going to put a headline tomorrow, Damodaran calls market bubble. You know why people like to do it? Because if the market collapses, you now become a guru. Think of how many people we anointed after 2008 saying, that guy's a guru, he called the bubble. I teach at NYU with Nouriel Rubini. I've not seen him in a while. But I used to call him Eeyore. You've seen the Winnie the Pooh? You've never seen Winnie the Pooh? Eeyore is this perpetually depressed donkey. Right? goes on, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. I've never seen Nouriel in a good mood. There's always a depression coming. And if you keep predicting depressions, one of these days you're going to be right? Just like a clock that's stuck at an... I'm not going around following Nouriel's advice or anything, because he's going to have kept me out of stocks for the last 15 years, telling me the sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. So be wary about, behavioral economics change the way we think, but I think we also have to be careful not to take human qualities and call them irrational, or, because it is who we are. And if it persists, maybe this is the norm, and not being that is the abnormal.
Professor, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So everyone is invited to a coffee outside. Thank you very much for joining us.